Hi, this is Jeanette Lewis, and this is the audio version of my book, Horses, Hayrides, and Husbands. It is the second in the Epperson series, romances, and if you haven't read the first one or listened to the first one yet, I will link it below, but you don't have to listen to it. They do build a little bit on each other, but you won't miss any of the key story if you just start here. Thank you so much.
Horses, Hayrides, and Husbands, by Jeanette Lewis. An Epperson family romance. All rights reserved. Intro. Old grudges and ornery cowboys are meant to be broken. Misty Epperson has her hands full with a toddler and a full-time job helping Ty run the Epperson Foundation, the charitable organization he founded with his lottery jackpot. But all the chubby baby cheeks and conference calls in the world can't drive away the emptiness hovering over her heart. She yearns for love, but Misty is wary. The last time she gave her heart away, it was returned to her battered and broken. When Misty meets Clydesdale wrangler, Travis Harper, she's drawn to his quiet strength and easy smile. But Travis quickly makes his hatred of rich people known, and Misty's brother is one of the richest men in the state. When Ty interferes with the Clydesdale's grazing pasture in the name of environmental protection, will Travis consider it guilt by association, or can Misty break this sexy cowboy with the giant chip on his shoulder? Chapter 1. The shiny black wagon with red-spoked wheels was piled high with hay bales. It sat on the stamped concrete driveway that wrapped around the enormous timber-framed house, ending at the garage and back. Lights coming from the kitchen windows bounced off the gold Sun Valley Clydesdale's logo painted on the wagon's side. At its front, a team of huge brown Clydesdales with black manes and tails stood patiently. One of the horses shook its head, whipping its mane and making the brass bells along its collar jingle. Misty Epperson took a few small steps, cautiously drawing nearer. At its shoulder, the horse towered at least a foot over her head, and its gigantic hoof, covered in long white hair, could crush her foot with one stomp. The horses shifted, shuffling their feet and twitching their tails, sending the bells jingling again. "I'll bet you're tired of waiting, huh?" Misty spoke softly. A few more steps, and she was at the nearest horse's head. Its velvety brown eyes focused on her. "You're such a pretty horse," Misty cooed. She reached out slowly to touch the shimmering brown coat, wondering if it would let her stroke the white blaze on its nose. "Hey." She jerked her hand back as a man appeared at the back of the wagon. He wore a baseball cap pulled low on his forehead, and his jaw was squared and dusted with dark blonde stubble. Under the brim of the cap, the kitchen lights caught the gleam of his blue eyes. "No touching the horses," he ordered. "Sorry," Misty said quickly, drawing her hand back and casting a longing look at the team. "Are you the owner?" "I'm the driver. Duke Soder is the owner." "Well, they're awesome. My son would love them." His thick eyebrows rose under the brim of the cap. "You don't look old enough to have a kid." She stiffened. "Well, I do. He just turned one, in fact." The man put up his hands. "You don't have to get defensive. It was just an observation." "Sorry," she mumbled. "I guess I'm kind of sensitive about it." Why was she telling him this? Some random wagon driver at a ritzy Sun Valley party didn't care if she was touchy about being a 21-year-old unwed mother. She watched for his eyes to shoot to her left hand to check for a ring. But they didn't. Instead, he stepped closer and gave her a small grin. 1-year-old and already a fan of horses, huh? That must mean you're bringing him up right. He smelled like a mix of musky cologne and fresh hay, and from this close, she could see that the hair peeking from under his hat was dark blonde and thick. Her insides fluttered in a way that hadn't happened in a long time. Okay, the words long time could be subjective, but she'd been almost totally focused on Wyatt from the moment she'd learned she was expecting him. So it felt like a long time. "My parents have 2 Morgans, and Wyatt loves to ride them," she told the driver. He patted the nearest Clydesdale. "This is Jemima and the other one is Sherlock. And I'm Travis. Sorry I yelled at you earlier, you can pet them if you want to." "Sweet." Eagerly, she stepped forward and reached out to run her palm over Jemima's warm brown neck and up into her coarse mane. The horse shifted nervously, but Travis spoke to her in a low, quiet tone, and she stilled instantly. She was unbelievably huge. Are they hard to handle? Travis shook his head. Jemima can get a little feisty if we're late for dinner, but mostly they're gentle giants. Misty continued running her fingers over the horse's neck. Well, yeah, a girl's gonna get cranky when she's hungry. We can't blame you for that, can we? She cooed. Jemima snorted and tossed her enormous head, sending the bells ringing. Travis chuckled. Looks like she likes you. I thought bells were only for Christmas, Misty said. It was early June, and the sound of sleigh bells, on a wagon no less, was somehow unsettling. Usually, Travis agreed. But the client wanted bells, so that's what she gets. Yes, Misty had met the party's hostess when she'd arrived, and she had no doubt Mrs. Milburn usually got whatever she wanted. She scratched along Jemima's mane and leaned in to sniff her neck. That's so good. There's nothing like horse smell, is there? Travis nodded and moved his hand along Jemima's neck, coming to rest so their fingers were only inches apart. No, there's not. Misty's stomach cartwheeled. Travis wore a black t-shirt that stretched over his well-defined shoulders and chest, and the skin on his arms was tanned and corded with ropey muscles. She felt an almost irrepressible urge to reach out and trace them with her fingertips. She quickly pulled her attention back to the horses. Do Clydesdales have any special needs, since they're so big? They have a few issues with breeding, harder to get them into foal, and they tend to have multiples, which can put a lot of strain on any horse, Travis said. Their joints can wear out faster because they're so heavy, but mostly, they're just like other horses. Well, and they eat a whole lot more than most horses, which means they poop a whole lot more. He gave her a rueful smile. Sorry, that's probably TMI. Oh, please. You're talking to the mother of a 1-year-old, Misty scoffed. Plus I grew up on a sheep farm, I've been around plenty of poop. His laugh was like biting into a gooey homemade roll, soft and sweet and filling. Do you mostly do hayrides for parties like this? She asked. Hayrides, sleigh rides, parades, and rodeos. And the stables are open for visitors, too, when we're not traveling. Sounds like fun. Eh? He shrugged. I don't mind the parades or the visitors, but parties are a pain. He cast a look toward the house. Especially parties like this. Like this? Why? This was Misty's first official party as a representative of the Epperson Foundation, the land preservation nonprofit founded by her brother Ty, and funded by the jackpot he'd won in the Idaho State Lottery. Misty hadn't been too enthused about the party, but Ty had said it was a good chance to meet some of Sun Valley's movers and shakers, those with the money and the power to get things done. You know how rich people are, Travis snorted. I'd much rather be mucking out the stables than driving a bunch of rich snobs around and listening to their gossip. They have more money than they know what to do with, but they always stiff on tips and think they can order everyone to do their bidding just because they're rich. Misty's heart dropped. Her brother could be called many things: billionaire, philanthropist, do-gooder, and a few choice names Misty invoked as little sister privilege, but the words stingy or snobby didn't even come close to making the list. She was about to argue the point when Travis's eyes skipped toward the kitchen windows, where a small army of caterers swarmed. They look pretty busy in there. You're not going to get in trouble, are you? Oh. Misty glanced down at her plain black dress. With its modest boat neckline and 3/4 sleeves, she was more covered than the majority of the women at the party. Add the sensible, 1-inch heels and the non-fussy styling of her strawberry blonde hair, and she could easily pass for a waitress instead of a guest, which Travis obviously thought she was. If she admitted she was a guest now, she'd embarrass him. Remembering the thrill that had run through her when their eyes met, she managed a small smile. I won't get in trouble. I'm on a break. Okay, it was partially true. He didn't need to know her break was from listening to boring chit-chat instead of hauling heavy trays. And maybe the tips will be good tonight, she rushed on. Awesome horses and a romantic hayride under the stars? I'd tip pretty good for that. He grinned, sending her mood soaring again. What's your name? Misty. She stopped at the last second. She wasn't rich, but Ty certainly was, and the Epperson Foundation was quickly making a name for itself all over Idaho. Would Travis consider it guilt by association? Rivers, she blurted quickly, using her mother's maiden name. Too late, she realized it wasn't the best combo. Travis's grin grew bigger, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Misty Rivers? That's unusual. Yeah. Her cheeks burned. My parents have a warped sense of humor. He chuckled and then checked his watch. Listen, they'll be coming out soon, and the hayrides will take at least a couple of hours. Could you meet me back here afterwards? Maybe we can go grab a bite somewhere? It was already after 9. By the time the hayrides finished, it would be close to 11, and then, with the drive home, it'd be going on midnight. Plus, she'd ridden from Haley with Ty and his wife, Holland. She doubted they'd want to hang around a few extra hours while she flirted with the hot cowboy who drove the team. I can't, Misty said, disappointment heavy in her chest. His face fell. Okay, I understand. No, I want to, she said quickly. But Wyatt is with my parents tonight, and it's already going to be late, she trailed off, feeling like an idiot. But Travis's eyes lit up. You said he likes horses, right? Why don't you bring him by the stables? Excitement tickled her stomach. He'd love that, Misty said. They exchanged numbers, and Misty gave Travis a quick wave as she turned back toward the house. At the last minute, she remembered he thought she was a waitress, so she entered through the kitchen doors and wove her way through the crowd of caterers, dodging people as best she could with mumbled excuse-me's. He wanted to see her again. A wave of anticipation flooded through her. So much of her time had gone to Wyatt over the last year that her social life was non-existent. She'd only been on 2 dates since his birth, and both had turned out to be duds. Yeah, part of it had been because the guys were duds, but mostly the problem had been with her. She was still reeling from the responsibilities of motherhood and still working through her anger at Wyatt's father, Chet. She hadn't been ready for a relationship. But she was now. Relationship? Whoa, slow down there. One good conversation and the promise of a date did not make a relationship. But, her pulse picked up again as she thought of Travis's smile. It looked promising. The party was spread through the main floor of the house, but most of the guests had congregated on the patio, a huge expanse of brown flagstones dotted with comfortable conversation areas and tables loaded with food. There was a sunken fire pit ringed with benches and filled with sand imported directly from a beach in Oahu. At least that's what Mrs. Milburn had been sure to tell everyone at least half a dozen times. At the other end of the patio, a black infinity swimming pool gleamed like a slab of obsidian, but no one was swimming. This was a networking kind of party, not a relax and have fun kind of party. Misty moved uneasily among the guests, looking for the tall outline of her brother. Ty usually stood above most crowds, but tonight the patio was so packed with guests he was hard to spot. Misty. I've been looking all over for you. Where'd you go? She bit back a groan as Gregory Brooks pushed his way toward her. Not Greg, Gregory. She'd already been corrected on that once tonight. Oh, hi, Gregory. I was just, she gestured vaguely. Circulating. Circulating? Well, why didn't you come find me? I know everyone here. He grinned, showing straight, white teeth that were slightly too big for his mouth. No, that wasn't fair. Gregory was a nice guy. And he was heir to Firebird, one of Sun Valley's most exclusive ski resorts. She should be honored. It wasn't every day a rich, handsome guy made an effort to seek her out. Even if he did have big teeth. Come on. He grasped her arm. The mayor is at the dessert table, I'll introduce you. As he propelled her across the patio by her elbow, Misty resisted the urge to turn and hurry back to where Travis waited with the horses. She'd so much rather spend the evening talking with him than with the mayor. I just saw the Clydesdales, she said. Doesn't it seem weird they're doing a hayride at such a fancy party? Her own dress might be understated, but many of the women wore cocktail dresses festooned with all kinds of sequins and beads, and the men were in expensive suits. Sitting in a wagon on a bale of hay seemed incongruous with this crowd. Gregory chuckled. This is Idaho. Most of them probably have their own horses. And I'm sure they'll have blankets over the hay, I wouldn't worry about it. Yes, Misty had already seen the black and red plaid blankets spread over the bales. I'm not worried, she said as he continued to guide her through the crowd. I'm just saying it seems odd. They'd reached the dessert table, and Gregory came to a stop beside an overweight man with thinning gray hair who was ladling strawberries onto a piece of cheesecake. Well, I know for a fact that Mayor Bixby has several horses, Gregory said loudly. The man turned. And he likes to ski the moguls at Firebird, Gregory finished with a wide smile. Gregory Brooks. The mayor set the strawberry spoon back in the bowl and extended his hand so the two men could shake. Good to see you again. How's the knee? Knee? Misty asked. I twisted it last season on the slopes, Gregory told her, pulling a wry face as he turned back to the mayor. Trust you to remember that, Your Honor. It's fine now, though, thanks for asking. Well, I'm glad to hear it. We can't have the owner of the best ski resort in the state out with an injury this year. He put a weird emphasis on the words best ski resort, like he didn't really believe it but wanted them to think he did. Absolutely right. Gregory laughed. And let me take this moment to introduce this beautiful lady. He moved his hand from Misty's elbow to her waist, pulling her closer and overwhelming her with his cologne. This is Misty, Ty Epperson's sister. She works with him at his foundation. The mayor's bushy eyebrows lifted. So nice to meet you, Misty. I just had a very interesting conversation with your brother. He tipped his head toward the fire pit, and Misty finally spotted Ty sitting on a bench with Holland. Nice to meet you, too, sir. Misty took a step away from Gregory, forcing him to loosen his grip so she could shake the mayor's slightly duggy hand. Both men looked at her expectantly, and her mind spun. What? Was she supposed to come up with something to say? Coming over here hadn't even been her idea, and she could have gone her whole life without meeting the mayor of Sun Valley. This is a nice house, she finally said. Her cheeks burned, mad conversation skills going on right there. But the men didn't seem to notice. They both immediately looked around, as if they'd never seen the house before, even though they'd been here at least 2 hours already. The mayor wrinkled his brow. I'm thinking of remodeling my patio like this, but I hear the exposed timbers are a mixed blessing. They're pretty, but you can't hide the electrical wiring, and they're a magnet for bees, don't you think? His eyes dropped to her hands, then back to her face with a questioning look. Misty realized she was cracking her knuckles and stopped, letting her hands hang limply at her sides. Oh, yeah. I guess bees could get pretty bad. Gregory nodded wisely. Of course, it's not so troublesome if they're outside. You're going to get bees anyway. Yep. Misty imagined spending the rest of the night in insect-related conversation with the mayor. Would they be limited to the pests in Sun Valley, or would they eventually branch out? If they were lucky, maybe they'd even make it all the way to the locust infestation in Argentina. Nope. Not gonna happen. She waved one hand in the direction of the fire pit. It's nice to meet you, Your Honor. The words sounded strange on her tongue, like she was addressing the Queen of England or something. I need to go speak with my brother. Make sure you keep on him about that Green Pastures initiative, Mayor Bixby urged. It's very important for our community. Misty hesitated, tempted to explain she had nothing whatsoever to do with Ty's decisions, but she stopped. What did it matter anyway? I'll do that, she finally promised. She'd hoped to leave both men to the cheesecake and was dismayed when Gregory joined her, his hand sliding back to her elbow. Did he plan to buddy up to her all night? What if he followed her onto the hayride? She'd been hoping to sit near Travis. What would he do if he saw her with Gregory Brooks? Ty was leaning back against the bench, one long arm looped around Holland's shoulders. Their shoes were off, and they were digging their bare feet into the genuine Hawaii imported sand. Hey, Misty. Check out this sand, it's amazing, Holland squealed. Well, that made sense. The beach was Holland's happy place and one of the biggest things she missed about California when she'd moved from Los Angeles to Idaho last year to help Ty with his charitable foundation. Of course, there was more than altruism at play there. They'd been married a few months ago on a beach in the Caribbean, and neither of them had come down from La La Land yet. They scooted along the bench to make room, and Misty slipped off her shoes. She couldn't help grinning as she stepped into the soft, warm sand. "This is definitely going on the bucket list for my dream house," she said as she settled onto the bench at Holland's side with a contented sigh. "It is a pretty cool idea." Gregory slid in next to her, his hip pressing against hers. She was going to smell like his cologne for a week. "You have to take your shoes off to get the whole experience," Holland chided, glancing at Gregory's loafer-clad feet. "Nah, I'm good." He gave a slight frown. "Sand really isn't my thing." Misty giggled at the look of incredulity washing over Holland's face. "Well, to be fair, he does own a ski resort," Ty said reasonably. Misty gazed at her brother in the flickering firelight. Winning the lottery and being catapulted into the world of the super-rich hadn't changed him much, and in some ways, he was still the same dork he'd always been. But meeting Holland had changed him in ways Misty hadn't expected. Sure, his clothes were a little better, and his hair was cut more often, but there was something else too, a newfound confidence that hadn't been there before. Maybe it was the confidence of being wanted, being loved. Her heart ached to experience that same feeling. How stupid she'd been to think she had found love and acceptance with Chet. She thought he'd be the love of her life, but he'd turned on her the moment she became pregnant, and now he was out of her life for good. And out of her heart. But what was left? The love she felt for Wyatt was fierce and deep and almost all-encompassing, almost. There was a piece of Misty that couldn't be filled by chubby baby cheeks and snuggles. A part of her that ached to feel a man's arms around her again, only in love this time, not lust. Would it ever happen for her? Could it ever happen? "Attention, ladies and gentlemen." A woman's voice cut through the noise, and the chatter of the party quieted. They turned to see Mrs. Milburn standing in the middle of the patio. "The hayride is ready, so if those of you who are interested will follow me, we have some genuine Sun Valley Clydesdales for your enjoyment." They all waded out of the sand, and Ty held out his arm to help Holland balance as she slipped on her stilettos. "You coming?" he asked Misty as she stomped the sand from her feet. Travis thought she was the catering help, and he obviously had a chip on his shoulder when it came to the party guests. And there was the problem of Gregory suddenly deciding to be her shadow. "Actually, I was thinking I'd go home. Can I take your car? I could call an Uber for you, or something." Sun Valley was only 20 minutes from Ty and Holland's home in Haley. It shouldn't be too hard to get a driver to come pick them up. "Why are you leaving?" Ty's dark eyebrows knit together. "Just reasons." Holland's green eyes narrowed as she gave Misty a look. "This is a networking party. You're not trying to run away, are you?" "Yeah, like you two are networking?" Misty cast a significant glance around the fire pit. There were several other people sitting on the benches, but Ty and Holland had been in their own little world. "So, can I take your car or should I call my own Uber?" She reached for her phone in her bag. "I thought you wanted to go on the hayride," Gregory broke in. She'd almost forgotten he was there. Misty played her trump card. "I need to get home to my baby." Gregory's eyebrows shot skyward. "Oh. I didn't." "Of course. That's the most important thing." Ty dug a yellow tag from his pocket and held it out. "Give this to the valet, they have my keys. And don't worry about the Uber. I'll bum a ride with someone." Misty paused. She'd forgotten about the valet parking. She had a $10 bill in her wallet, and while it would probably be a small tip in comparison to what some of the others would pay, it was all she had until payday, and Wyatt was almost out of diapers. "I can take you home, my Lambo is out front," Gregory offered. Holland gave her a knowing smile and Misty gritted her teeth as the yellow ticket disappeared back into Ty's pocket. Now she had at least another half hour with Gregory. Why had she ever agreed to come to this party, anyway? 10 minutes later, they were speeding down the road in Gregory's orange Lamborghini. The back end of a black wagon came into view. The Clydesdales moved in perfect rhythm, bells jingling in the warm summer air, seeming to pull the packed wagon without any effort. Travis sat in the driver's seat. He'd swapped the baseball cap for a cowboy hat, probably to better fit the cowboy image. Misty slid down in her seat as Gregory swerved around the wagon, hoping the car was low enough that Travis wouldn't be able to see her. Her heart twinged with a sudden, fierce longing to be sitting next to him, bouncing on a wooden wagon seat instead of ensconced in the plush Italian leather next to Gregory. Travis had her number. She hoped with all her heart he'd call. Soon. Whoa, girl. It's all right. Travis spoke in a low soothing tone as the Lamborghini roared by, cutting too close to the wagon. He pulled the reins gently, bringing Jemima back under his control, and muttered a bad word under his breath. The car had come from the party and was, of course, a typical rich guy, acting like he had the road all to himself. Jemima calmed down once the car was out of sight, and they finished the first ride without any further incidents. At the house, the team stood patiently while the first group of guests unloaded and another climbed aboard, situating themselves onto the blanket-covered bales. There were muttered complaints about the smell, which Travis ignored. He'd given the guests perfunctory instructions, then busied himself with the horses while they climbed into the wagon. His boss probably wouldn't be too happy with him for not socializing, and his tips would probably suffer, but he didn't care. They were adults, they could handle climbing in and out of a wagon on their own. Besides, his mind was on Misty, and he couldn't stop his eyes from drifting toward the kitchen windows, looking for the flash of her bright hair. Her back would probably hurt as much as his did by the end of the night. Maybe he'd text her and they could commiserate. Hi there. Travis looked up as a tall man in a dark suit approached. I'm Ty. The man held out a hand and Travis shook it reluctantly. Travis. Ty didn't seem to notice his hesitation. Nice to meet you, this is a beautiful team. He reached out one hand to let Jemima smell his palm, a simple gesture that told Travis this man knew horses. I'm going to jump in and I think we're ready, Ty said after letting Jemima sniff him for a minute. Okay, sounds good. Travis nodded. He shot one more glance toward the kitchen and then turned his attention to his job. 40 minutes later, Travis pulled the horses to a stop at the side of the house. The guests immediately began jostling one another to get out, though Travis noticed the tall man and the pretty woman he sat with stayed back, letting others get out before them. Thanks, Travis. We had a lot of fun, Ty said when they'd finally unloaded. He stretched out his hand, a $50 bill between his fingers. You're welcome, Travis said, eyeing the money. That's too much. I didn't do anything but drive. Are you kidding? The woman at Ty's side spoke up. We had so much fun, it was very romantic. She wrapped her hands around Ty's bicep, and Travis noticed the huge diamond on her ring finger. Okay, well, thanks, he said, taking the money. Ty nodded and gave Sherlock's flank a quick pat. Then he and his wife joined the rest of the crowd heading back into the house. That looks like the last of them. Mrs. Milburn came forward. Her eyes darted quickly to the 50 Travis still held. Thank you for coming, everyone had a nice time. He nodded. My coworker will be here in a few minutes to load the wagon. I'll see to the team, then take care of the mess on the driveway. He jerked his head toward where the Clydesdales had left a few unauthorized presents. Mrs. Milburn wrinkled her nose. That'd be great, thank you. I didn't think they'd make such a mess. Well, they're big animals, Travis excused the horses. They stood in silence for a moment. Mrs. Milburn had already paid online, but that fee covered the horses and the wagon. The driver worked off of tips, and this was usually the part of the evening where the host showed their gratitude. Her eyes shot again to the 50 and she gave him a smile. Okay, then, thank you very much. The meaning was clear. Since he'd obviously been tipped so well by a guest, she was excused from coughing up any of her own money. Travis clenched his teeth. Could you please show me toward the restroom? He shifted his weight, intending to follow her into the house, but she threw up an arm and pointed toward the garage. There's one just inside that door. I'd rather not risk having you track anything into the house. She cast another look at the mess the horses had left on the concrete. Sure, no problem, Travis managed tightly. He didn't have to check to know his boots were clean. Clydesdale manure was like elephant dung, you didn't step in it without knowing. He spun on one heel and stalked toward the garage, crumpling Ty's 50 in his fist. Chapter 2. Misty stared at the jumble that had suddenly appeared on her computer screen in shock. All she'd wanted was to import a simple picture into her report, not add 3 more pages, shift everything to full justified, and change the font to 20 point. She groaned and hit the undo button, resting her chin on her palm as the document reset itself. I heard that. What's up? Misty's mother, Ellen, poked her head into the office. She was a small woman with a pixie haircut and a gentle smile that never wavered. In the last year, Misty had noticed an uptick in the strands of silver in her mother's hair. Probably her fault. Her parents adored Wyatt and were completely supportive of her decision to keep him, but Misty knew they'd been saddened to see her become a single mother, especially at such a young age. Just this stupid report, Misty grumbled, waving a hand at the computer. The document was back to before the picture formatting disaster, and she quickly hit the save key. Ellen cocked her head to one side as she stepped to the corner to gaze at Wyatt, who slept in a portable crib. Sweet boy, she murmured, then sank into the overstuffed chair across from Misty's desk. So, how was the ride home in the limbo? Misty felt her cheeks redden. You heard about that, huh? Ty told me. What's Gregory like? Is he nice? You know what people who own Lamborghinis like to talk about? Misty asked. Lamborghinis, she declared, answering her own question. Okay, so he's a little show-offy, her mother allowed. But Ty said he seems like a nice guy. I guess, Misty said non-committally. You don't like him? Was that disappointment in her mother's tone? Misty bit her lip. Now that they had money, or more accurately, now that Ty had money, the family had been pulled into different circles than those they used to operate in. Well, not so much her parents. They still lived on the sheep farm, albeit in the dream house Ty had built for them instead of the more humble farmhouse of Misty's childhood. But they'd kept their same friends, their same routines, their same lifestyle. Her dad still ran the farm, and her mother still made quilts, went to lunch with friends she'd had since high school, and doted on her grandson. But life had changed for Misty and her little sister, Ashley. Their parents had broached the idea of moving Ashley from Wood River High School to an exclusive private school in Sun Valley, where she would supposedly have more opportunities. Ashley was firmly against the idea, and Misty suspected her sister would win out, but now that she was a mom, she could see both sides of the argument. As a parent, who wouldn't want to give their kids the best they could? And the only evidence Misty needed that her life had changed was the party last night and a ride home with one of Idaho's most eligible bachelors, a man who probably would never have looked twice at her before her brother won a fortune. I like him, Misty said in answer to her mother's question. I hardly know him though. How was the rest of the party? Memories of Travis's grin flooded her mind, sending her heart stuttering. They had Clydesdales. Have you ever seen one up close? They're huge. I know. Bert Merriweather used to have a team, and he'd take us sleigh riding in the winter. That sounds awesome. This was a hayride, but they had bells. Travis, the driver, said they usually only use them for winter, but sometimes the guests want them. She stopped abruptly. The need to talk about Travis was almost overwhelming, but her mother would pick up on her mood in a second, and Misty didn't want the third degree about a man she barely knew, especially when her mother seemed far more interested in a potential relationship with Gregory. She was saved when Wyatt began to fuss in his crib. They both jumped up. I didn't mean to interrupt your work. How about I take this big boy out for a while? Misty's mother leaned over the crib and gathered Wyatt into her arms, planting a noisy kiss on his cheek. Hello, sweetheart. Did you have a good nap? Wyatt's blonde hair stuck up at odd angles, and he gave Misty a two-toothed grin over his grandma's shoulder. I can take him, Mom, Misty said, her arms already aching to hold her boy. You go ahead and work. Ellen nuzzled Wyatt's neck. We'll go hang out with Grandpa for a while, maybe take a walk. They left, and Misty settled back into her chair and turned her attention to her computer screen. But tears filled her eyes until the words and graphics were a jumbled blur. More than anything, she wanted to be a full-time mom to Wyatt. But that would mean depending on Ty even more than she already did. He probably wouldn't mind, but she would. Her text alert dinged, and she glanced at her phone lying next to the computer. It was Travis. Her tears dried instantly, replaced by a tingle of excitement. She picked up the phone and tapped the screen. He'd sent a picture of a Clydesdale. Or rather, a Clydesdale's nostrils, since it was taken rather close up. Jemima says hi. Misty bit back a smile as she typed her reply.
Aww.
What a cutie. I don't know if cute is the word I'd pick, but she's all right. Where's her buddy? A few minutes later, another picture came up, this one of a different horse. Sherlock's fat and happy. Cute, but actually, I meant her other buddy. How about a pic of you? A thrill of anticipation shot through her as she hit the send button. Travis couldn't stop grinning. Misty wanted a picture of him. It was better than he'd dared to hope. He rethought that feeling when he remembered what he was wearing, a pair of dirty blue jeans and a black Sun Valley Stables t-shirt spattered with mud, hay, and worse. Would Misty think he was gross? Well, she knew he worked at a stable, right? He held up his phone and flicked the camera to the front view. Oh geez. Please tell me you're not taking a selfie. We've got those stalls to clean out. Doug Hinckley, co-worker and royal pain in the rear end, strolled around the corner, a shovel balanced on his shoulder and a coil of new DR ropes on the other. He looked like he was about to break into a chorus of hi-ho. Travis quickly lowered the phone. No, just checking to make sure my hair's still looking good. Doug frowned. At 28, he was only a year older than Travis, but his receding hairline was a sore spot. Well, served him right. His text alert pinged again and he glanced at the phone. It was Misty. Still waiting. Harper. Let's go, Doug urged from the doorway to the stable. I'm coming. Travis lowered his head over the phone and typed out a quick text. Rain check? I've got to get back to work. He hit send, then had a better idea, and quickly started texting again before she could respond. Or, how about dinner tonight? Misty sat studying Travis's text. The excitement that had filled her stomach minutes before had dissipated as quickly as the air inside a popped balloon. She'd been prepared for some harmless flirting, maybe a few weeks of texting where they could get to know each other. But Travis was already asking for a date. Tonight. Just because they'd had a few good minutes together didn't mean she was ready to spend a whole night alone with him. What if he wasn't what he seemed? You have bad taste in men, her little sister Ashley had told her last year. Ashley was only 15, but she was right. Misty had a knack for picking the losers, the flashy guys. Her high school boyfriend, Jared Kistner, had been the star baseball player. He ditched her at the senior prom to sneak off and make out with Shauna Goodwin behind the bleachers. And Chet was a wannabe rodeo hero who treated women worse than the steers he roped.
Ugh.
Misty's eyes flickered to the pictures of Wyatt covering her desk. There were a lot. Every time she got a new picture of him, she planned to put it in the frame over an old one, but when she actually had to do it, she couldn't bear to cover up his little face. So her desk was running out of space, and Wyatt grew frame to frame from a tiny, shriveled newborn, to a bright-eyed, chubby-cheeked one-year-old with silky blonde hair that stood up on the top and collected in curls along his neck. Wyatt was her priority now, and she didn't have the freedom to make mistakes anymore. It wasn't about her, it was about Wyatt and giving him what he needed. Did he need a daddy? That role would never be filled by Chet. He'd given up his parental rights before Wyatt was even born, practically the same day she told him she was pregnant. She wanted nothing from him. She'd spent hours reading about the importance of a strong male role model for her son, but that didn't mean she needed to get married, right? Her dad was very involved in their lives, and Ty was a wonderful uncle. In addition to the material support, Ty doted on Wyatt and constantly brought him toys and roughhoused with him. Wyatt's face lit up every time Uncle Ty came in the room, and he reached for him with his fat baby hands, splayed like starfish, his little pink lips split in a wide grin. But what would happen when Ty and Holland started having their own kids? Ty would mean well, but Misty knew that fatherhood would change the relationship he had with Wyatt. Was Travis the kind of guy who liked kids? What about a kid that wasn't his own? Her alert went off. It was another text from Travis. Still waiting for an answer. She remembered the way his hands had brushed over Jemima's side, his low, patient tone when he spoke to the team. You could tell a lot about someone from the way they treated animals. Besides, it wasn't like he'd asked her to elope. It was just a date. She picked up her phone and sent a reply. Dinner sounds great. Chapter 3. Calico Pete's Bar and Grill in Ketchum wasn't fancy, but the food was delicious and plentiful, and it had a live band on the weekends. Travis held the door for Misty, then followed behind her, enjoying a whiff of her spicy perfume. The dining area was huge, and tables were clustered along the edges, leaving the dark wood floor in the middle open for dancing. A stage stretched across the far end of the room, and a band stood amidst the lights, picking out a country tune. He was glad when the hostess seated them at a table at the back so they wouldn't have to shout over the music. A smiling waiter brought chips and queso and left the menus, promising he'd be back. This place is cool, Misty said. She perched on the tall stool, her eyes wide as she took in the room and the couples on the dance floor. I've never been here before. You've never been to Calico Pete's? Travis shook his head. What a tragic waste of a young life. She reached across the table to smack him lightly on the arm, and his pulse picked up at the brush of her fingers against his skin. They'd met in the parking lot, and when she'd climbed out of her car, she'd looked so cute in her floral print dress and high-heeled red boots. It was all he could do to keep from gathering her into a hug. Sitting across from her now at the small table, he had an almost irrepressible urge to touch her, hold her, learn the smell of her hair. The band was playing a Rascal Flatts song, and Misty bounced on her stool in time with the rhythm. Do you dance? She asked. I might have a few moves. What about you? She gave him a saucy glance over the top of her menu. A little. You look really cute tonight, he said. Her cheeks colored, and the menu didn't hide the smile springing to her lips. Thanks. You're not too bad yourself, cowboy. They were interrupted by the waiter. How's your baby? Travis asked after they'd ordered. He's good. I think he's teething, though, because his sleep schedule is out of whack and he won't eat the banana puffs he usually loves. She paused and gave him an embarrassed grin. Sorry, nothing worse than a mom going on about her kid, huh? I don't mind, I like kids. Her eyes flashed with something he couldn't interpret. Satisfaction? Relief? Sure. I'll bet you say that to all the girls. No, I'm serious. He swirled a chip in the cheese sauce and took a bite. They're a lot like horses. Feed them, water them, keep them out of trouble, and you're good, right? She laughed, a light, musical sound that seemed to pierce straight to his heart. Yeah, sure. You make it sound so simple. No, I know it's definitely not simple. When are you going to bring him to the stables? Was he pushing too hard? They were only a few minutes into a first date, and he was already eager to set up the next one. But he couldn't help it. He just wanted to pull her close and keep her there, indefinitely. Misty made a face. Soon. He'd love to see the horses. But work is kind of crazy right now. I have a big report that's giving me trouble. I thought you worked for the catering company. Her cheeks colored. Oh, that was only temporary, she said quickly. During the day I'm an assistant for a company in Haley. Okay. He nodded, unsure why the question seemed to bother her. Well, I'm ready whenever you are, we can even hitch up the wagon. Her strawberry hair swung against her shoulder as she reached for her water glass. How long have you worked at the stables? He had to stop and think for a minute. About 3 years now. What did you do before that? I was in school to be a veterinarian for farm animals. So what happened? Why didn't you finish? The back of his neck prickled. Just stuff. Life. You don't want to talk about it, she guessed. No, he didn't want to talk about it. But it also wasn't first date stuff. He was trying to look like a strong, competent guy who had it all together. Admitting a woman had broken his heart and derailed his life wasn't exactly the best way to do that. The band broke into The Devil Went Down to Georgia, and couples around the room gave out a whoop. Travis jerked his head toward the open space in front of the stage. Wanna dance? Okay, so he didn't want to talk about it. Fair enough. There were a lot of things Misty didn't want to talk about either. For example, how she was semi-lying to the hottest, nicest guy she'd dated in, maybe ever. She'd forgotten he thought she was a waitress. Well, now he knew she wasn't, so at least she cleared that up. But what she hadn't said loomed large in her mind. She hadn't said her name wasn't Misty Rivers. Or that her brother was one of the richest men in the state. The room spun as Travis whirled her across the floor. He hadn't been unduly bragging, he was a good dancer, easily keeping up with the fast tempo as he led her smoothly through a series of country swing moves. She used to dance with Ty like this. They'd push the furniture out of the way, turn on the latest Garth Brooks CD, and spin each other around the living room until they were breathless and laughing. But this was better than dancing with her brother. Travis's hand on her waist brought a buzz of excitement, and his palms sliding along her arms as they did a tabletop sent her heart racing. The hard work he put in at the stables was evident in his hard, rounded muscles as she ran her own palms down his arms. You're pretty good at this, Travis said as he swung her around to face him. Likewise. Misty grinned. He grasped her hand for a corkscrew, but instead of releasing her after one or two spins, he kept going, turning her again and again. The heels of her boots thumped against the wood floor, faster and faster, until at last the music stopped and she collapsed, exhausted and dizzy, into his arms. They were both panting, face to face, standing in the middle of the dance floor. The band started another song. Misty thought it might be something by Alan Jackson, but neither of them moved. Travis's breath was warm on her face and his eyes sparkled. He dropped his gaze to her lips, then back to her eyes again as his hands tightened around her hips, pulling her closer. Misty caught her breath. Did she want him to kiss her? It was only their first date, but things were going well, and even if she wasn't a girl who would never, ever explore more than kisses before marriage again, kissing was something she was plenty well and prepared and anxious to explore. She stumbled as another couple bumped into them, whirling by. Oops, sorry, the guy called over the music. I guess we're in the way, Travis said softly. The moment was broken, and Misty eased herself out of his arms. I'm going to run to the restroom. I'll meet you at the table. Travis slid onto the stool and stared at the ribeye that had been delivered while he and Misty were dancing. 20 minutes ago, he'd been starving. Now the only thing he wanted was a taste of Misty's lips. But he wasn't going to jump into anything like an idiot. That's what he'd done last time, and look where he'd ended up. He should have known from the beginning that Ashlyn was way out of his league. They'd met at Utah State, where he was working towards a degree in biology. She was majoring in broadcasting, and technically, their paths should never have crossed. But they had in the lounge area of the Taggart Student Center when she'd asked to share his table. She was dark-haired, petite, and pretty. He'd been completely dazzled. He couldn't believe his luck when she accepted his offer for a date, and soon Travis was in love. Too soon. Ashlyn was in love too, or so she said, when she kissed him, when she met his family, and when she accepted his engagement ring. She'd loved him right up until suddenly she didn't anymore. Right up until she met Dylan, a rich kid with a fancy car and a giant trust fund. 4 months before the wedding, Ashlyn gave the ring back, leaving Travis with nothing but humiliation and a broken heart. There were warning signs, if he'd known to look for them. She liked designer clothes, hinted he should swap out his trusty pickup for something a little better, and when they were diamond shopping, she'd refuse to consider anything less than a full carat, even though she knew it would put him into debt. She'd wanted to live in the best part of town and had been upset when he suggested they rent first instead of buying a 5-bedroom house for just the two of them. He should have clued in, but instead he went along. Because he thought that's what love meant, giving in and going along instead of working together and compromising. His parents had made it look so easy, he hadn't taken the time to really learn all the tiny things that made a successful relationship, and he'd only seen his mistake when it was too late. It had been a hard lesson, but now, 3 years later, he had to admit that Ashlyn had been right to break off the engagement. Maybe she hadn't gone about it the right way, but the marriage would have been a disaster. Not that the realization made the pain and humiliation any easier. He glanced up just as Misty emerged from the bathroom. She drove a slightly nicer car than he did, but just barely. And her clothes were cute, but they weren't designer, as far as he knew. Her makeup was understated, she didn't wear fake nails, and her only piece of jewelry was a narrow silver chain glittering at her throat. And she sometimes had to work weekends for a catering company to make ends meet. If anything, they were probably pretty equal in their financial standing. The thought was comforting. Misty was halfway across the room when a man, not quite middle age, but getting there fast, stood up and approached her. Travis was too far away to hear what they were saying, but he was instantly on the alert, shifting his weight on the stool in case he needed to come off it quickly. The man gave Misty a cheesy smile that faded at whatever she responded, and he slunk back onto his chair, glaring at her back as she marched across the floor toward Travis. What was that about? He gestured toward the man. Nothing. Misty flipped a lock of her silky hair over her shoulder. He asked me to dance, and I told him I was on a date. Travis turned to look back at the man, who sneered and made a rude gesture. He seems kinda pushy. He seems kinda like a jerk, is more like it. She made a face as she slid onto her stool, but her expression changed to a smile when she saw their food. This looks fantastic. I'm probably going to steal your sweet potato fries though, so fair warning. The tension in Travis's shoulders evaporated and he grinned. Help yourself, he said, sliding his plate toward her. Maybe I should have taken Beer Belly up on his offer, just to see what you'd do. Her beautiful blue eyes twinkled with mischief as she swirled a fry in ketchup. You want me to start a fight? This is a civilized establishment, he reminded her. Misty's face fell and her lower lip poked out in a pretend pout. Where's the fun in that? They kept the conversation light during dinner, talking mostly about horses, dancing, work, and her son. The way Misty lit up at the mention of Wyatt told Travis all he needed to know about how she felt about being a mom. What's something most people don't know about you? He asked as he finished the last bite of his steak. Something serious? Not necessarily. Just something unusual. Her forehead wrinkled as she thought for a minute. My mom made me take baton twirling lessons when I was little, she finally said. Travis laughed. So maybe I should have asked you for a routine instead of a dance earlier? No way. She shook her head. I was awful and I hated it. But my mom wouldn't let me quit, at least not until I'd broken 2 of the lamps in the living room. You broke them by accident, though, he clarified. Okay, if that's what you want to think, Misty said. A smile hovered at the corners of her mouth. Travis blinked at her. You didn't. Are you saying you broke them on purpose? She made a zipping motion across her lips. Whoa. She was a feisty little thing. I'll bet you were adorable, though, he said, picturing a little red-headed Misty clutching her baton. Grinning at the image, he polished off the last of the sweet potato fries. Yeah, adorable. She made a face. I'd much rather have been outside riding my bike or helping with the sheep. What else do you like to do? Lately there doesn't seem to be much time for anything but work and being a mom. Misty ran her fingernail along the grain of the wood tabletop. I guess I deserve it, though. I'm too impulsive, which is how I ended up with a baby at 21. She flushed and bit her bottom lip. He reached across the table to take her hand. Her fingers were small and cold in his. I think you're fantastic. And I think Wyatt's very lucky to have you for his mom, he said evenly. She raised her head, and his heart pinched to see the tears sparkling in her eyes. Sorry. She gave a small, self-conscious laugh. I'm kind of a baby myself about things like that. He gave her fingers a squeeze, loving the way her hand felt in his, fighting back the urge to stand up and pull her into his arms. Her necklace glittered in the lights, and Travis wondered what the delicate skin on her neck would feel like beneath his lips. But it was too soon. He didn't need to rush things. I hear they have an awesome chocolate lava cake, he said. Want to dance a little more first, then split a piece? Chapter 4. Misty unlocked her front door to find Ashley sprawled on the couch with a book balanced on her stomach. How'd it go? She asked. Good. Ashley looked up. We played outside for a while, then I fed him and put him down about 7. He didn't like dinner, though. She pulled a face. He ate the beef stew okay, but pureed prunes? What were you thinking? He needs them, Misty said defensively. He's been having trouble with regularity.
Ew.
Ashley dropped her book and put her hands over her ears. Don't need to hear it. Sorry. Misty grinned. So did you have fun? Ashley asked, uncovering her ears. Yeah, he's really nice. She could have stayed on the dance floor all night if it meant being in Travis's arms. He smelled good, she added, aware she was grinning like an idiot, but unable to stop. Ashley raised her eyebrows. Did he kiss you? I don't kiss on the first date, Misty said firmly. But you will on the second, Ashley guessed. Maybe. Thoughts of kissing Travis sent goosebumps dancing through her body. Well, I'm glad you had a good time. You deserve it. Ashley closed her book and stood up, reaching for her hoodie. Thanks for babysitting. Want me to call Dad to come get you? Ashley rolled her eyes. No. 1. If I needed to call Dad to come get me, I have a phone and could do it myself. 2. It's just down the road. I'll be fine. Okay, but text me when you get there so I know you made it. I swear, you're turning into as big a worrier as Mom, Ashley said, stuffing her paperback into the front pocket of her hoodie. Just do it? Misty urged. Fine, I'll text you. Ashley left, and Misty stood by the front door, watching as her sister walked down the road. Misty lived in the old farmhouse, and the new house Ty had built for their parents wasn't that far away, but still, there was only a dirt road separating their farm from Chet's family farm, and even though he was gone, memories of him could still make her angry. When she could no longer see her sister's blonde head, Misty shut the door and went upstairs, sneaking softly into Wyatt's room. It used to be her room, but now she'd taken over her parents' old bedroom and given this one to Wyatt. She'd spent months decorating it with a cowboy theme, changing the wall color from buttery yellow to sky blue and staining and distressing her old oak dresser to the color of a faded pair of jeans. Her mother had made a quilt from red and blue bandanas, and her dad had hung a lucky horseshoe over the door. A wooden rocking horse and a life-sized stuffed sheep, both gifts from Uncle Ty, stood in the corner. Wyatt slept on his back with both arms flung over his head. His little tummy moved rhythmically to his deep breathing, and his eyelashes lay as soft as moth's wings across his peach-fuzz cheeks. Misty reached out gentle fingers to twist around the downy soft curls just beneath his ear. He needed a haircut, but she couldn't bear the thought of chopping off his baby curls. She would forever rue the day she'd staked her heart on Chet, but if that's what it took to get Wyatt, she'd do it again. Her baby was the best thing that had ever happened to her, and even during the hard times, there'd never been a moment she wished she didn't have Wyatt in her life. But she did wish for a partner, someone to take the 2 a.m. shift when Wyatt was sick. Someone who would be just as excited as she'd been when he first rolled over. Someone who was planning his future as tenderly and anxiously as she was. Everything with Chet had been so rushed. There'd been attraction and the excitement of discovery, but it all happened so quickly. 1 minute his head was bending towards hers, and the next, it was like he was devouring her, his lips and hands everywhere all at once. It all happened so quickly, she couldn't keep track of it all, couldn't feel it all, couldn't savor it all. Of course, Chet hadn't been interested in savoring anything. His goal was simple and his needs were immediate, and he took care of business without much preamble. Or postamble, for that matter. They hadn't been together that many times, but afterward, there was never the leisurely moments where they could lie entangled in one another's arms the way they did in movies. They'd straighten their clothes, he'd drive her home, and that was that. Then her period was late, and Misty drove an hour to the Walmart in Jerome to buy the pregnancy test, terrified the whole time someone would see her. Later, at home, she stared in disbelief as 2 pink lines steadily darkened on the test. And despite everything, she felt a rush of joy. Okay, maybe the baby wasn't exactly coming in the right circumstances, but what mattered was that she and Chet loved each other. She was 19, he was 22, and they were young, but people got married at their age all the time. She'd fallen asleep with dreams of a little house not far from their families and chubby baby cheeks to kiss any time she wanted. The next day she'd slipped into a coat and turned her face away from the icy October wind as she crossed the road. She threaded her way among the outbuildings of the Coleman farm until she found Chet in the machine shed, fixing a broken chainsaw. When she told him about the baby, his face had blanched, his mouth making the perfect O of a hooked fish. He made that same look of desperate surprise the fish does when it's yanked from the water, and all her hopes died. Great. The chain from the saw clattered as he threw it onto the oil-stained workbench. Now what? What do you mean? Are you going to put it up for adoption? Or maybe you should get in, he trailed off, and the suggestion hung in the air between them. She didn't miss the singular pronoun, and she spread her hands protectively over her still flat stomach. Chet, it's our baby, your baby. How could you even suggest? He clutched the wooden edge of the workbench, sputtering curses. How could you be so stupid? I thought you were on the pill. Obviously not, she snapped. Besides, why is that my job, anyway? Chet ground out several more bad words, ignoring her question. Misty forced herself to take a deep breath, she had to be calm for the baby. So it's not the best time, she reasoned. But there's work on the farms and our parents will help us. Families start out with much worse. He blinked at her in disbelief, and a mocking grin sprang to his lips. Wait, you think I'm going to marry you? Well, what else? Chet rolled his eyes. Are you seriously this dumb? No way am I marrying you, and no way am I having a kid. So if you want to keep it, then keep it. But I never wanted it, so don't come bawling to me for money or babysitting or whatever. Misty stared at him for a moment, then spun and marched quickly back the way she'd come, fighting sobs. The icy breeze sent her coat flapping around her hips as the weight of single motherhood settled onto her shoulders. She was in her second trimester when Ty won the lottery and became a billionaire. Chet was furious, but he'd already signed away all his parental rights, and Ty's expensive lawyers made sure the paperwork was ironclad. The phone in Misty's hand vibrated, and she looked down to see Ashley's message. She'd made it home safely. She breathed a sigh of relief and left Wyatt's room, leaving the door open a crack. She went back downstairs and straightened up the kitchen, loaded the dishwasher, then roamed through the living room, picking up Wyatt's toys and returning them to the basket by the stairs. The memories of Chet could still burn, but they were slowly being replaced by better things, like Wyatt's smile, the way he said "Mama," how he squealed when Ty tossed him into the air. And now she had other memories to savor as well, like the warmth of Travis's fingers enclosing hers. Dancing. The smell of his shirt when he'd hugged her.
Goodbye.
The shiver of energy she felt at the thought of seeing him again. Misty hugged one of Wyatt's stuffed dinosaurs to her chest and smiled to herself. Things were going to be okay. Chapter 5. You gonna give the other hares a turn? Huh? Travis looked up from the brush in his hand into the twinkling eyes of Duke Soder, owner of Sun Valley Clydesdales. Travis had often wondered how old his boss was. Maybe late 50s, though you couldn't judge based on his looks. He always wore button-down shirts with the sleeves rolled up, and everywhere the sun touched, his skin was as brown and tough as the leather collars that hung in the tack room. But under the brim of his hat, his forehead was as white and smooth as buttermilk. You've been brushing that one spot on Sherlock for about 10 minutes now. I'd say it's as smooth as it's gonna get, Duke said. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Travis flushed and moved the brush farther along Sherlock's back. Good thing he was so patient. Some of the other horses would have started stamping their feet and flicking their tails into his face by now. Duke's light gray eyes twinkled. I know that look. Is she pretty? She? Whatever woman's got you so hooped. Travis couldn't stop the grin from springing to his lips. Yeah. She's pretty. He'd driven home from Calico Pete's in a haze and lain awake most of the night thinking about Misty, going over their date and then trying to remember everything his mother and sisters had taught him about women. Had she had a good time? Would she want to see him again? Had he made a fool of himself dancing? When was the last time he'd wanted to impress a girl so badly? Well, there'd been Ashlyn. But she almost didn't count anymore. Maybe it was maturity, or maybe it was because it had been so long, but what he remembered feeling for Ashlyn couldn't hold a candle to what he was already feeling for Misty. It felt like she was someone he'd always known and had always been missing. Now that she was here, he couldn't imagine life without her. Duke chuckled and clapped him on the shoulder. I'll let you get back to your daydreaming. I'll try to pick up the pace, Travis said quickly, then had a thought. Her son loves horses. Is it okay if I take them out in the wagon sometime? The wrinkles between Duke's eyebrows deepened, and he nodded. Better not wait too long. I might have to make some changes around here. Travis's blood turned to ice water. Was he about to be fired? Sorry about the daydreaming, he said quickly. It won't happen again. Duke's face registered confusion for a moment, then understanding, and he gave Travis a reassuring smile. Don't go getting worried, it's not you. I'm hitting a snag with the grazing pasture. The grazing pasture was federally owned land about 10 miles to the east of Sun Valley. It was open for all, though the use had dropped off significantly over the last 2 decades as the smaller farmers and ranchers had gone out of business. Travis and Doug usually took the horses to the pastures in the fall, when the grass was long and plentiful and before the start of the busy Christmas season. A few weeks grazing in the mountains, under the watchful eye of the Sun Valley Clydesdale staff and dogs, gave the horses some freedom, a new diet, and, importantly, saved Duke thousands of dollars in feed. What's the problem? Travis asked. Duke shrugged. Government red tape. Not much to do about it. Years of working for Duke had taught Travis that more questions would only make his boss clam up. Unless Duke wanted to talk about it, Duke wasn't talking about it. He nodded quickly. If I can help, let me know. Yup. Duke let his eyes rove over Sherlock. Then he sighed and patted the big horse on the neck. Yup, he said again before disappearing into the barn. Travis started brushing Sherlock again as his thoughts drifted, automatically it seemed, back to Misty. How long were you supposed to wait after a date to text a girl, anyway? He didn't want to come across as desperate. Hang it all. He also didn't want to let his dumb insecurities get in the way. Travis ground his teeth and dropped the brush into the bucket at his feet that held the grooming tools. He dug his phone from his pocket and pulled up Misty's number. Misty's heart was as light as a helium balloon as she loaded Wyatt into the car and drove the half-hour to meet Travis. 2 dates in less than a week? That had to be a good sign. He was already waiting, leaning against his battered truck in the gravel parking lot of the Wild West Disc Golf Park. It was a beautiful day, and he wore a pair of loose shorts and a t-shirt that accentuated the muscles in his chest and arms. Her nerves tingled at the thought of those arms wrapping around her. She parked and he came around the car to open the door for her. When she stepped out, she was practically in his arms already. Hey, you. He grinned and gathered her into a hug. Hey, yourself. Butterflies took flight as she wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her cheek against his shirt, breathing in his musky cologne mixed with the ever-present smell of fresh hay. They stood for a moment, and she wondered if he would try to kiss her, but then a squeal erupted from the back seat, and Travis loosened his grip to lean down and look into the car. Well, if it isn't the famous Wyatt. How are you, little man? Wyatt grinned and pounded on the arms of his car seat. He's anxious to get out, Misty said. She hurried to unlatch Wyatt and lift him out. She dressed him today in denim shorts and a plaid shirt and a pair of tiny cowboy boots that were too expensive for her budget, but way too cute to pass up. She balanced Wyatt on her hip and rummaged in the back seat for the baby harness. "I brought the baby carrier," she said. "I'll wear it," Travis offered. "You sure? He can get pretty heavy. Are you questioning my stamina or trying to handicap my golf game?" Travis demanded with a twinkle in his eye. "Who says I can't do both?" She grinned, relieved at the thought of not having to wear the harness over the hilly terrain of the 18-hole course. Wyatt did get heavy. The harness was really a glorified backpack, and Misty started giggling as Travis slipped it on. It had been sized to fit her and she had to loosen the straps a lot, so they would fit across his much bigger frame. "This is almost worse than hitching up the horses," Travis observed. He held Wyatt out of the way as she scurried around him, pulling on straps and buckles. "I know," Misty agreed. "Maybe after this you'll appreciate what they go through." "Okay, but I'd better get a treat after this the way they do." She buckled the last strap and came around to face him. "Sure. A nice big helping of oats?" His eyes dropped to her mouth, and his lips quirked in a smile. "I'm sure we can think of something better than oats." Misty's fingers trembled as she picked up the diaper bag and dug out the sunscreen. "Did I make you uncomfortable?" Travis asked into the sudden silence. "Nope." Misty smeared the white cream along Wyatt's chubby arms. It made her excited more than anything. Her head buzzed. Would it be bad form to call off this whole outing and just get to the kissing? He was talking about kissing, right? The way his eyes had lingered on her lips, she was fairly certain she'd got his meaning, but memories of how badly she'd misread Chet were enough to pull her back. Instead, she plopped a wide-brimmed hat on Wyatt's head and held out her arms. "I'll put him in the seat if you'll turn around." Travis's eyes were thoughtful, but he handed Wyatt over and obediently turned so Misty could slide him into the harness and strap him in. Once Wyatt was settled, Travis retrieved a black bag from the floor of his truck while Misty shouldered the diaper bag, and they set off. At first Wyatt wasn't too sure about the arrangements and kept a wary eye on his mother. But once they started moving, he settled in and seemed to be enjoying the ride. After a short walk, they reached the first hole, nothing more than a patch of grass set among the spruce and horse chestnut trees, bordered by sagebrush and lavender. A wooden box held scorecards and tiny pencils below a sign that designated the hole as par 3. "Okay, give me the rundown," Misty said. "Disc golf is like regular golf with a lot of the same rules," Travis said. "But instead of clubs and balls, we use these." He reached into his black bag and pulled out several flat discs in various colors. Misty gave him the side eye. "So? Frisbees?" "Okay, if you want to be a peasant about it," Travis said with a shrug. "But those of us who are serious about it call it disc golf." "Do you play often?" Misty asked, not liking her chances of winning. "Nope," Travis said with a grin. "I've never done it before, but I watched a couple of YouTube videos about it last night, so I'm 100% more prepared than you are." She slugged him lightly on the shoulder.
Yeah.
"Because you didn't tell me what we were doing. If you had told me, I would have studied up too." "And where'd you get the I mean discs, if you've never played?" "Borrowed them from my brother." "He's into it," Travis replied. "You're a turkey." She couldn't resist touching him again and poked him in the ribs. Travis jumped away. "Hey, no tickling." "Wait, what? Mr. Big Tough Cowboy is ticklish?" She poked at him again, but he dodged. "Easy now," Travis warned. Misty wasn't Ty's little sister for nothing. She'd endured enough abuse over the years to learn a few things about persistence and strategy. She unleashed a flurry of tickling, her fingers darting over Travis's ribs as he howled and squirmed, trying to get away. In the baby carrier, Wyatt giggled. "Okay, that's it." Travis finally insisted. In one quick move, he captured Misty's hands, wrapping his fingers around her wrists and bringing them up between them. "Now what are you going to do, tough guy?" he demanded, his eyes twinkling. A breeze ruffled his hair, and the sun glinted along the blonde stubble on his cheeks. Misty's breathing grew shallow. Her fingers itched to touch him, differently this time, run her fingers through his hair, scrape her fingernails along the scratchy jawline. His lips were the perfect fullness, not too thick, not too thin, and his breath on her face was tinged slightly with peppermint. In the baby carrier on Travis's back, Wyatt let out a howl, and the moment was broken. "I guess he thinks we're taking too long," Misty murmured, her eyes never leaving Travis's. "Yeah, I guess," he said, and as he let go of her wrists, she saw her own disappointment mirrored in his eyes. Then he shook his head. "Man, you're a fighter." She cocked one hip. "You ain't seen nothin' yet. Are you ready for me to beat you shamelessly at frisbee golf?" He gave her an easy grin. "Let's do this." Chapter 6. It was harder than it looked. Travis had thrown frisbees before, but never with such precision, and never with a baby strapped to his back, though he didn't mind that part. The course was laid out like a golf course, only with a basket at the end instead of a hole. In theory, it should have been easy. It wasn't. He squinted down the length of the grass to where the basket, topped with a yellow flag, glinted between two pines. A successful throw would require a slight curve to the left, or he'd be in the rough. He lined up, drew his arm back, and sent the disc sailing with a flick of his wrist. For half a second he had hoped his strategy would work, but then, instead of making the turn, the white disc continued straight, hit a juniper tree, and dropped into the clump of sagebrush at the tree's base. Travis groaned. "So much for my attempts to impress you with my mad frisbee skills." Misty giggled. "I'm not doing much better, you know." They'd spent more time chasing after frisbees than actually scoring points, but that was part of the fun, and Wyatt seemed to be enjoying himself, babbling and giggling as they moved around the course. Misty stopped often to point out animals, mostly ducks and geese, but they saw a few squirrels and chipmunks darting among the rocks and the trees. "Look, Wyatt, there's a goose." Misty pointed to a pair of cackling geese who were loitering in the water hazard at the 12th hole. Her frisbee had landed near their small pond. "Goose," Wyatt said. "Careful," Travis said as Misty started toward her frisbee. "Those things are mean." Misty stopped. "They are?" "Yup. Very aggressive and territorial. And they have teeth on their tongues, did you know that?" Misty eyed the geese warily. "Are you trying to scare me?" "No. Trust me, you don't want to mess with a goose," Travis said fervently. "Uh-oh. Sounds like there's a story to go with the warning." She grinned. "Did you have a run-in with an angry goose?" The geese drifted closer. "Let's move along," Travis advised. "But we haven't finished this hole yet," Misty protested. The geese seemed to have made a decision. Almost in perfect synchronization, they squawked and started climbing out of the water, their heads extended, beaks open. "Okay, you're right, this one's a loss." Misty darted forward to scoop up her pink frisbee, and they took off, speed walking away as fast as they could. "So, hole 12 is a draw," Travis said once they were out of range of the geese. "Goes to the geese," Misty agreed. "So I'll draw a big old 0 on this scorecard," Travis said, pulling the piece of paper from his pocket and waving it at her. She nudged him with her hip. "Yup, a big old goose egg." Travis broke out laughing. Had he ever felt this at ease with Ashlyn? He couldn't remember, but it certainly wasn't by the time they'd reached a second date. As much as he thought he loved her, there had always been a slight unease, a feeling of being measured and maybe found wanting. And his worst fears had been proven right when she'd run off with Dylan. It had been more than the money problem. He hadn't seen it then, but now he could look back and realize Ashlyn was always evaluating, seeking the advantage. Trying to one-up him in everything from GPA to a golf score. She would never have been content to let the geese drive them away from the hole, because that would mean the score wouldn't be accurate. Misty didn't seem to mind though. In fact, the score seemed to be the furthest thing from her mind, and as they walked along the course, Travis stuffed the score sheet back in his pocket and knew he wouldn't need to worry about it again. He glanced at her from the corner of his eye. Today she had her hair pulled through the back of a blue baseball cap. The color matched her eyes and brought out the freckles in her pale cheeks. He reached out and took her hand, marveling at how neatly her palm fit against his, how their fingers laced together perfectly. Misty gave him a small smile and tightened her grip, swinging their hands between them as they walked. It all felt so easy and natural. What happened to Wyatt's father? He asked. A shadow passed over her face. He's a loser, she said grimly. Travis's mind immediately pulled up all the things the guy could have done to qualify as a loser in Misty's mind, and a spark of rage began to burn in his stomach. Did he wasn't abusive? He asked tightly. She stopped walking and faced him. No, not like you're thinking. He wasn't a nice person. But it's over now. The spark festered, in danger of igniting. Travis flexed the hand not entwined with Misty's. From somewhere amid the roaring that suddenly filled his ears, he heard her voice. Hey, don't worry about it. He can't hurt us, ever. Not if I can help it. The words were out in a low growl before he could think. Misty was feisty and independent, and it wouldn't have surprised him in the slightest to learn she had a gun hidden somewhere on her person today. But that didn't stop the thrumming in his chest, the fierce need to protect her if he could. Not that you need protecting, he said quickly. His words were cut off as she went up on her tiptoes and kissed him. Misty could tell by the way he stiffened slightly that Travis was surprised by the kiss. Well, that made two of them. She hadn't meant to kiss him, at least not so suddenly. She'd hoped there would be kissing before their date was over, and all signs were pointing in the right direction. In her head, he'd be the one to make the first move, but he'd been irresistible with the wind ruffling his hair and the scowl of protectiveness on his face. His lips were hard at first, surprised, but instantly softened under hers. He ran his hands gently from her wrists to her shoulders, and her eyes drifted closed as he took control of the kiss. Travis's fingers gently cupped her jaw as his lips played along hers, moving slowly. Misty sighed, savoring every second as he learned the shape and feel of her mouth. The roughness of his jaw scraped softly along her skin, bringing with it the scents she had started associating with him: aftershave, sage, hay. Goosebumps shivered over her skin and she was lost, drifting in a dream where they were the only two people in the world, and all that mattered was the heat racing through her body. Her palms were on his chest, and she could feel his heartbeat pounding beneath the thin fabric of his shirt. Memories of kissing Chet washed over her. It had been nothing like this. There was no sweetness to Chet's kisses, only urgency and hormones. When Chet kissed her, Misty always felt like her brain had shut down, leaving only a dim splinter of guilt that something wasn't quite right. But this was totally different. Instead of shutting down, she felt fully awake, maybe more awake than she'd ever been. Every one of her senses kicked into high gear: the feel of Travis's lips on hers, the hard muscles under his shirt, the minty, fresh smell of him. Even her sense of sight seemed to be working overtime. Though her eyes were closed, she could see him, imagine the two of them intertwined, see the way his body curved over hers. Mama. Wyatt's tiny voice pulled her back from the moment. Travis's lips tightened over hers as he grinned and they broke apart. Sorry babe, Misty told Wyatt. Mama was busy for a minute. Her head spun and her knees were shaking. She clung to Travis, not trusting her own equilibrium. I think I've had enough disc golf for today, Travis growled in her ear. What about you? They were on the 12th hole, which meant 6 more to go. If they left now, that would mean more time for kissing. Maybe. Probably. Misty couldn't help smiling. Sounds good to me, she said. They held hands as they walked back to the truck, though Misty wasn't sure she was actually walking. Floating was more like it. As cheesy as it sounded, she felt like the world had shrunk until it was just the three of them and nothing else mattered. The giddy haze stayed with her as she followed his truck all the way back into town and to the restaurant, where Travis got Wyatt out of his car seat and into a high chair without even asking her. It was weird to have another adult sharing this responsibility as wholly as she did. How are you so good with kids? She asked as she slid into the booth across from him. Big family. He shrugged. I'm the oldest of 7, so I learned early how to help out. 7? Wow. Misty raised her eyebrows. Yeah. He gave her a wry grin. The best word to describe my house growing up was loud. That's how it is now too, come to think of it. 3 of my siblings are still living at home. I think it's great, Misty said. Most men don't know what to do with babies. Most men? His tone was teasing, but there was a hint of jealousy in his eyes. Does that mean you date a lot? She unwrapped the top of her straw and blew into it, shooting the rest of the wrapper at him. No, weirdo. It's just a general observation. He smiled and plucked the straw wrapper from the front of his shirt. Oh, well, I don't mean to brag, okay, maybe I mean to brag a little bit. But I know a lot about babies. Ask me anything. Her mind went blank, and everything she'd learned about babies in the past year disappeared from her brain. Really? Travis shook his head. Pathetic. She rallied. Okay, smart guy. What age can you start solid foods? Around 4 months, but it varies. What sizes do kids' clothes come in? Hand me down. She rolled her eyes at his self-satisfied grin. That's a technicality, but I'll allow it. What do you do for colic? Could be a gas bubble, so try burping first. If that doesn't work, change the environment. If you're inside, go out, and vice versa. Her mouth fell open. Told ya, Travis said, his blue eyes twinkling. Oh, what a cute little guy. The waitress appeared at their table, and it took Misty a moment to realize she was talking about Wyatt, not Travis. Are you ready to order? They ordered burgers, and Misty dug in her diaper bag for Cheerios to tide Wyatt over until the food arrived. She and Travis were sitting across from each other, but she wished they could be side by side, his arm brushing against hers, hips pressing together. Her heart skipped at the thought of their kiss and his hands on her back, pulling her closer. I'm driving the team for a party at Mayor Bixby's house next weekend, Travis said. I guess he really enjoyed the hayride at the Milburns' party. Any chance he hired the same caterer and I'll see you there? Her throat tightened. She'd almost forgotten her little lie, misleading him into thinking she was a waitress instead of a party guest. She needed to tell him the truth. But it wasn't so bad, right? After all, it was only their second date, and even though she felt like she'd known him forever, they were still in the get-to-know-you phase of this thing. About that. She broke off at a sudden commotion across the room as a group of people broke out in applause and cheers. They looked over to see their waitress holding both her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with surprise. A handsome young man in a yellow button-down shirt stood up and wrapped his arms around her. Phone cameras flashed as they posed for several pictures. Wonder what's going on? Travis said when the noise had died down. I don't know. Engaged, maybe? Misty guessed. Except the couple didn't act like they were in love. They stood arm in arm, and while they were both beaming, it was mostly for the cameras, not for each other. In fact, they barely even looked at each other. But then, what did she know? She'd thought Chet Coleman was the love of her life, and look how that had turned out. Wyatt swiped his fist across the tray of the high chair, sending Cheerios flying. Misty and Travis both dove for them and spent a few minutes picking cereal out of the carpet, then refilling Wyatt's tray with a fresh handful. What were you saying earlier? Travis asked after they were both seated again. Sorry about the wait, guys. The waitress suddenly materialized at their table with their drinks. I'll go see if your food's ready. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears and her face seemed stuck on permagrin. It's okay, Misty said quickly. Did you just get engaged? What? The girl's confusion was plain. To that guy over there? Misty pointed, but the man in the yellow shirt was gone. Oh, no. The girl beamed. He just gave me an amazing tip. I've heard about that kind of thing happening, but I never thought it'd happen to me. Her face took on an almost reverent look. $100, she whispered. Can you believe it? The bill was only $28 and he left me $100 extra. Wow. Misty grinned. Congratulations. That's amazing. The waitress nodded happily and hurried off. Misty turned to Travis. Wow. So nice of that guy. Yeah, I guess. His words were short, his face impassive. What? You saw the way he posed for photos with her. If he wanted to do a good thing, why not give her the tip and then leave without causing a scene? And I'm sorry, but $100 isn't that big of a tip. That guy just wanted attention. Just like all rich people. Misty bit her lip, thinking of Ty. Her brother was the opposite of attention-seeking. When he'd won the lottery, he'd been embarrassed by all the attention. And aside from buying a pretty sweet car, he'd done almost nothing for himself with the money. He took care of his family, gave away a lot to various charities, and had started a foundation to address a problem he felt passionately about. What? Travis asked, after she'd been silent too long. You don't agree with me? I know some very nice rich people, Misty finally said. What would Travis say if he knew the media had written stories about her brother, calling him Idaho's hottest billionaire bachelor? Travis shook his head. Well, I don't. They're all the same to me. He scooted a few of the Cheerios closer to Wyatt's grasping fingers. Anyway, you said you had something to tell me? Oh. How was she supposed to tell him the truth now? Misty bit her lip and pretended to think. Wow, I guess I forgot. She forced a laugh. I'll probably think of it at 2 o'clock in the morning. When you do, you can text me, Travis said with a wink. I'd wake up at 2 a.m. for a text from you. Guilt squirmed in her stomach. She had to tell him, but not right now. They were still in the new bloom of a relationship, she couldn't bear to introduce a conflict so soon. The potential problems could wait. Chapter 7. Travis and Doug were unloading hay bales, throwing them from the back of the pickup to the stack by the side of the stable, when Duke came around the corner leading Jemima by a rope attached to her bridle. One look at his boss's face, and Travis knew something was wrong. You okay? He asked, heaving another bale, which landed with a dusty thud onto the others. Duke wiped his forehead with his free hand. I just got word the state has shut down the grazing pasture, he said. Wrinkles of concern splayed from the corners of his eyes. What? Doug said. Why would they do that? They say they have to do an environmental impact study before they can allow any animals back in there. Travis shucked off his leather gloves. What the heck's an environmental impact study? I dunno for sure. They have to bring in a bunch of scientists and see if the horses are ruining the land or endangering the native species, something like that. Doug snorted. Ruining the land? By eating grass? Yeah. Duke shrugged. Doesn't make much sense, right? Why now? We've been using the pasture for years, Travis pressed. I called the Bureau of Land Management, and the lady there said it's because a local company filed a petition, that foundation I told you about. They want new legislation passed that will affect federally owned lands, and before any lawmakers can consider it, the EPA requires an impact study. Do you remember which company it is? Travis demanded. Duke's eyes looked thoughtful. The Epperson Foundation, I believe. Travis pulled out his phone and Googled it. The page for the Epperson Foundation came up quickly, and he skimmed through their company's statement. They're a non-profit, and they want to return federally owned lands to the states, he announced. By shutting down our pastures? Doug demanded. Duke shrugged. Who knows how things work in Washington, or in Boise, for that matter. Those folks don't have any idea they're hurting real people and real animals. He sighed heavily, then gave each of his workers a direct look. It sure puts a knot in our rope. Without the pasture grass, we'll have to buy feed for the horses, and, man, I'm going to have to work the numbers to see if I can afford it, he said thickly. I may have to get rid of a few horses. Travis's gaze traveled over the stable where the Clydesdales were waiting for their dinner. He'd been here 3 years, had helped deliver 2 of the younger ones, and with any luck, Crooner should be pregnant now. He thought about how Jemima got bossy with the others, how Lytton liked to but him around when he groomed her, how El Diablo took off running the minute he was released to the pasture. His heart clenched. Which ones would they lose? Doug was on his own phone. Says here the Epperson Foundation is owned by a guy who won the lottery a few years ago. Hey, I remember that. He won something like $1 billion. Biggest jackpot in state history. Travis gritted his teeth. And now he thinks he can push everyone else around just because he has money. He glanced at Duke. Okay, if I finish unloading and then take off for a few hours? Sure, but what are you going to do? They're in Haley. Travis waved his phone, still open to the Epperson Foundation. Its contact page showed a small house on Haley's Main Street. Maybe I can go talk to this idiot and see if he'll withdraw his application. He rehearsed what he'd say during the drive, and as the miles ticked by, he became more and more ticked off himself. Everything was going great, and then some stupid foundation had to come meddling, driving honest, hard-working people out of business because some rich guy thought he knew better than everyone else. His temper burned. When he reached the right address, he parked by the curb. He was a mess, hay stuck to his jeans, his boots caked with mud and worse, but he didn't care. He'd earned this grime, the spoiled jerk who ran the foundation couldn't say the same. The front door squeaked when he pushed it open, and though everything smelled like new paint, the wood floors were obviously old, as was the reception area. A pretty redhead looked up from a desk with a smile. Welcome to the Epperson Foundation. How can I help you? I want to talk to whoever is in charge of environmental impact studies, please, Travis said, working hard to stay civil. Mr. Epperson is out of town right now. She flipped through a schedule on a tablet. He'll be back next week, can I schedule a meeting for you then? Travis ground his jaw. Typical. The guy threw his money and influence around and didn't even stay in town to see the fallout. I need to speak to someone now, he grated. It's kind of urgent. The receptionist hesitated. I guess I could see if Ms. Epperson is available. Will that be okay? Yeah, fine, whatever. Please have a seat, I'll be right back. She got up from her desk and disappeared down a short hallway while Travis paced around the room, sending the old wood floor creaking. There were brown leather couches in the waiting area on either side of a large wooden trunk that served as a coffee table. Outdoor magazines were scattered across the trunk's surface, and large, framed pictures of famous Idaho landmarks covered the walls, the Tetons, Yellowstone, and Shoshone Falls. Sir? The redhead was back. Ms. Epperson can meet with you. Right this way, please. He followed her down the hallway to an oak door. The receptionist knocked quickly, then opened the door and stood back. Go right in. Travis stomped through the open door and stopped dead. Misty looked up from her desk, and her heart fell, seeming to drop straight through her body to splat onto the floor beneath her feet. Travis stood framed in the doorway, his face going from anger to shock to incredulity in an instant. Misty? What are you doing here? I should ask you the same question. I work here, she said, hating how her voice shook. But she said, Travis turned to look back toward the reception area. That woman said I'd be meeting with Mrs. Epperson. Ms. Epperson, Misty corrected, feeling the heat rushing to her face. Ty is my brother. Wait. The guy who owns this place, the rich guy, is your brother? She waved one hand toward a chair. Do you want to sit down? He closed the door and moved farther into the room. You told me your name was Rivers. His tone was hard, like a shovel scraping over concrete. She clenched her fingers together. Rivers is my mother's maiden name. I didn't want you to know I was a rich person. That's not what she trailed off, that's exactly what she'd meant. Her temper flared. What's the big deal, anyway, she demanded. Travis crossed his arms. You tell me. You're the one who thought you should lie about who you were. Only because you were being completely unreasonable at the party. The first thing you said was how much you hated rich people, and I didn't want you to think. So you lied to me? No. Her shoulders drooped. Okay, a little. I fudged my name, but only because I knew if you heard Epperson, you'd think the worst, and I didn't want. I already liked you. She hoped her admission would soften him up, but it only seemed to make him angrier. The tan skin of his jaw tightened, and his eyes seemed like lasers, cutting straight through her. Your brother is Ty Epperson, billionaire lottery winner. His words matched his eyes, harsh and sharp. Yes, Misty admitted. But so what? My brother is a great person. He does a lot of good with his money. So much good that he's driving us out of business. Misty shook her head. What are you even talking about? His boots thumped on the floor as he paced across her small office. The Northlands pasture has been shut down for an environmental impact study, requested by, who could it be? The Epperson Foundation. And without the pasture, my boss can't afford to feed all the horses, so now he'll have to sell some of them. Is that what your brother wanted? No, of course not. Misty took a careful breath. I don't. I do marketing, I don't deal with this kind of stuff. But if the feed is the problem, I can have Jamie cut you a check. How much do you need? She thought it would help, but knew instantly she'd made a mistake. Travis shook his head incredulously. So you stick your nose where it doesn't belong, and then when it hurts someone, you try to buy your way out of it? How typical. That's not what I'm doing. Really? Seems that way to me. His voice rose. We don't want your money. We want the pasture open so the horses can go there just like they have every year, and you and your brother can butt out. She floundered, not sure what to tell him and unable to think of anything besides how stupid and pig-headed he was being. Why don't you just wait until my brother gets back and he can work things out? In a week? What are the horses supposed to eat in the meantime? Air? Misty ran her hands through her hair. Jamie will write you a check, she said through gritted teeth. Buy the stupid feed, and when Ty gets back, he'll figure it out. You can pay us back if it's that big of a deal. That big of a deal, Travis parroted bitingly. Nice how you throw out words like that. As if a man's livelihood and lifetime of work means nothing. That's not what I said. She gestured to the chair on the other side of her desk. Will you please sit down so we can discuss this like normal people? Travis glared at her. I'll stand, thanks. And don't bother about the check, we'll figure it out without your help. Misty slammed her hands down on her desk. Then why do you even come here? I came to see your brother and give him a piece of my mind. Then I guess it's a good thing he's not here. You don't seem to be playing with a full set, so you might want to hold on to as many pieces as you can. Travis's eyes widened and he stared at her for a moment. Wow. I guess it's a good thing this is coming out now, he finally said. What's coming out now? How you're just like all the rest, a spoiled rich girl who thinks money will solve all her problems. She glanced at his hands. Hands that only a few days before had been holding her face so tenderly as he gave her a goodbye kiss. Hands that had been splayed through her hair, sending tingles shooting through her body. Now they were clenched into fists at his sides. I'm trying to help. You're the one acting like a complete jerk, she said. I'm not the one who lied and went so far as to give me a fake name right from the start. Well, sorry for trying to get past the giant chip on your shoulder. I don't have a chip on my shoulder. You're right, Travis. It's not a chip, it's more like a, she searched for the right word, came up short. It's more like an entire 2x4. He snorted. What does that even mean? That you're an idiot, is what it means. Misty yelled. She darted a look toward the empty crib in the corner. Thank goodness her mom had Wyatt today. After a long moment of silence, Travis grunted. It's been real. Guess I'll see you around. He turned, wrenched the door open, and stomped out of her office. Misty leapt from her chair, raced around the edge of her desk, and slammed the door behind him so hard the windows rattled. She watched through the sheer curtains as he climbed into his truck and screeched away from the curb. Deathly quiet filled the house, made worse because Misty knew Jamie was probably frozen at the reception desk, completely bewildered. Well, that made two of them. She made her way back to her desk and sank into her chair. What had just happened? She felt stunned, like she'd had a bad fall and hit her head. 1 minute she was daydreaming about Travis's kisses, and the next he'd come raging through the door yelling about rich people. A light tap sounded on her door and Jamie's voice filtered through the wood. Misty? Is everything okay? Yeah, fine, Misty said, swallowing hard. There was a pause. Do you need anything? No, I'm okay, thanks. Jamie's footsteps retreated down the hallway, and Misty buried her face in her hands. Everything was jumbled and glary, like too bright sunlight stabbing her eyes. What had she said? What had he said? Spoiled rich girl. Liar. Misty clenched her fingers in her hair as her anger flared. She replayed the scene again, her mind conjuring up 1,000 better reactions than the one she'd given him and 1,000 names she wanted to call him. Okay, she shouldn't have misled him about who she was, she could understand his confusion and anger about that part. But in hindsight, hadn't she been right not to tell him? He'd proven today how completely unreasonable he was about it. If she'd been honest with him at the party, at least she wouldn't have wasted her time. And her kisses. And her dreams. Stupid. She grabbed her phone and pulled up his number, her mind vacillating between anger and sorrow. Did she want to call him more names or apologize and ask his forgiveness? She didn't know. She stared at his name for a long time, then finally scrolled to the edit menu and pushed delete contact. Travis drove back to Sun Valley on autopilot, only marginally aware of what he was doing. He'd fallen too fast again, let himself get in too deep, and here he was, right back in the same situation he'd been in with Ashlyn. Heartbroken. Only this time felt worse. Because Misty had seemed like a part of him, like someone he'd known for a long time, someone he'd been missing for a long time and had finally found. It had all felt so natural, nothing forced, nothing awkward, just everything clicking along like it should. Yeah, because she's a liar. He stomped on the gas and his old pickup roared in response. When he reached the stables, he parked around the back and went in through the side door. It was dim and quiet, the only sounds came from the stalls where the Clydesdales were patiently chewing their afternoon oats. Every once in a while one would push out its breath in a whoosh. Travis slid back the bolt to Jemima's stall and stepped inside. She turned her head, regarding him seriously with her liquid brown eyes, seeming to know something was wrong. He reached out and stroked her neck. He'd gone to Haley to try and save her and the rest of the horses, and instead he'd ruined everything, for the stables, for the horses, and for himself. Groaning, he dug his fingers into Jemima's coarse black mane and pressed his face to the soft brown hair of her neck. The thought of never seeing Misty again, never being able to hold her again, pierced his gut like a knife, twisting deeper and deeper, offering no hope of relief. Chapter 8. Misty squinted at her menu in the darkness. The restaurant was so dim she was tempted to take out the flashlight on her phone. But that would embarrass everyone, Holland, Ty, and especially Gregory Brooks, who sat to her right, his arm resting on the table and nudging up against hers. The double date had been Holland's idea. Misty hadn't even known she had Gregory's number, but 10 minutes after she'd agreed to the date, Holland had everything set up. There are shops up and down Main Street with all kinds of local handmade crafts, Holland was telling Gregory. She and Ty had just returned from a weekend trip to Cobble Creek, Wyoming, and Grand Teton National Park. I ordered a sofa table from a place called Frank and Signs. It's completely handmade from reclaimed hardwoods and will be here next week. I can't wait. Trust Holland to scout out the best shopping, Ty said with a grin. Hey, I did plenty of hiking and the paddle boats behind the hotel, Holland said, shooting him a lofty look. I deserved those shopping days. Besides, it gave you some time to meet up with those donors, right? I'm only teasing you. Ty gave her a look that would normally have had Misty rolling her eyes. He was so in love it was sickening. Did you meet the McIntyres at the Milburn party? Ty asked, turning to Gregory. Misty searched her memory for someone named McIntyre and came up blank. The only thing she remembered from the Milburn party was Travis. I don't think so. Gregory shook his head. Good people, Ty said. Amanda was very interested in the foundation. I hope they'll come for a visit soon. I keep telling Dad we should get more involved with your work, Gregory said. But for now, we're too busy with the resort. Ty gave him a quick grin. Don't worry, I'll get you eventually. They brought me this bracelet from Cobble Creek, Misty said, holding out her wrist. She'd been trying to join the conversation, but once the words were out, she wished she could take them back. She sounded like a child, interrupting with a toy to demand attention while the grown-ups talked business. It's really pretty. Gregory bent forward to examine the delicate silver bracelet gleaming on her wrist. Maybe I should bring up your foundation with Dad again. He straightened and gave her a meaningful look. It'd be fun to work together. Misty's cheeks warmed. Did he think she'd been hinting at ways to spend more time with him? We should probably decide on dinner, Holland broke in smoothly. I hear the tuna tartare is amazing. Like fish sticks with tartar sauce? Misty asked. I didn't see it on the menu. Gregory laughed. No, not fish sticks. Tuna tartare is raw tuna steak mixed with spices and avocado. It's delicious. No thanks, I don't like raw fish, Misty said, wrinkling her nose at the thought. How about the lobster tail? Holland asked. The herbed butter they use here is so good I'd eat it plain. Misty glanced around the restaurant. The low timbered ceiling and thick, dark wood paneling on the walls made the place feel oppressive and did little to help with the lighting situation. There were several chandeliers made from elk antlers hung around the room, but the dimmer switches were fully engaged, and they emitted only a weak glow. The restaurant's centerpiece was an ancient linden tree, and the building had been constructed around it. The tree rose through the floorboards and disappeared through the ceiling, the massive trunk covered in scaly bark. In any other situation, Misty would have found it charming, but here it seemed contrived and kind of sad, like it was trapped in this room longing to breathe free. Her mind raced back to Calico Pete's with Travis. The live music, the scrape of their boots on the worn hardwood floors, the feeling of his fingers holding hers as he'd spun her around and around until they were both dizzy, laughing. It had only been 3 weeks, but it felt like a lifetime ago. She hadn't seen him since their fight, and if he'd tried to contact her, the unknown number app on her phone had done its job and blocked him. The ache in her chest built, heavy and depressing. So, lobster tails, then? Holland's voice pulled Misty back to the present, and she nodded. Can you order for me? I'm going to the restroom. Gregory stood quickly to pull her chair out. It's just around the corner, he pointed. Want me to come with you? To the bathroom? Even in the dim light, she could see him wince. Well, to wait outside, he said quickly. I'm a big girl, I'll be right back, she assured him. Tears filled her eyes and the room began to swim as she wove her way between tables and around chairs. By the time she reached the restrooms, she could barely see. Quickly she burst through the door, grabbed a folded linen towel from a stack on an ornate table, and pressed it to her eyes. She couldn't cry, wouldn't cry. Travis was a jerk. There'd been something between them, a kernel of something that could have been great, and he'd thrown it away for the dumbest of reasons, his stupid pride and his stupid bigotry toward rich people. Are you okay, miss? She whirled around at the soft voice to find an elderly woman sitting in a chair next to the table with the towels. Misty hadn't even seen her. What kind of a place still had a bathroom attendant? It was like she'd gone back in time. Is everything all right? The woman asked again. Yeah. I'm fine. Misty glanced down at the crumpled towel in her hands, now smeared with mascara. Would she have to pay for it? Sorry. I didn't realize anyone was in here. It's okay, the woman said with a kind smile. She waved her hand toward the table, which held tiny bottles of hairspray, perfume, and mouthwash in addition to the towels. Can I get you anything? No thank you. I just need a few minutes. Misty looked around for a place to set the dirty towel. The woman extended her hand with a smile. Take your time, dear. Misty handed her the towel and darted around the corner and into a stall, locking the door behind her. Her tears had dried, shocked away by the appearance of the bathroom attendant, but the ache in her heart flared just as painfully as ever. She thought she knew heartbreak when Chet turned his back on her and on their baby. But now that felt like ancient history. And even though they'd grown up together, she'd barely known him. No matter what else he'd said, she could see now that Chet had only ever wanted one thing from her. She'd only known Travis for a few weeks, but what she'd felt in those weeks went beyond time and distance and anything she'd ever had with Chet. The sting of betrayal from Chet was merely a flesh wound she could shrug off with the knowledge he was a dirtbag and what they'd shared was lust, not love. It was nothing compared to what she felt when she thought of Travis. A deep, tearing ache in her heart, followed by a choking sense of panic. What was she supposed to do now? How could she live the rest of her life knowing the feelings she'd had for him existed, but also knowing he was gone? Misty? Holland's voice drifted through the bathroom. Are you okay? She went in there, Misty heard the bathroom attendant say. Holland's black Louboutins appeared at the door of the stall and she knocked. Hey. Is everything all right? Misty swallowed down the lump in her throat. Yeah, it's fine. I just need a minute. There was a pause. Do you want to talk about it? Holland asked quietly. Misty unlocked the door and faced her sister-in-law. Not really. Not Chet, is it? No way. I don't have any contact with that loser. And it can't be Gregory, you barely know him, Holland guessed. Then who? Fresh tears brimmed in Misty's eyes. No one. Just a guy I met. We went out a couple of times, now it's over. But you like him, more than like him, I'd guess. Yeah, and he turned out to be a jerk like all the rest, Misty said fiercely. Holland's big eyes were full of sympathy. What happened? Tears threatened again. Ty and Holland had had a whirlwind romance, but nothing like this. Would her sister-in-law think she was crazy for falling apart over a man she barely knew? How could she ever explain the feeling of rightness that had engulfed her as she'd watched him carry her baby through the golf course, patiently feed him Cheerios, or tenderly buckle him into his car seat? And was it her own heart she mourned, or Wyatt's, knowing he'd lost someone who would most likely have been an excellent father? Misty clenched her jaw. We'd probably better get back out there. Holland waited while Misty washed her hands and patted her cheeks dry, then Holland tipped the bathroom attendant and they left the room together. Gregory's been telling me about the ski resort, Ty announced when they were back at their table. I looked it up online, Holland said. Skiing looks amazing, I can't wait to learn. What? You don't know how to ski? Gregory asked, eyes wide with surprise. Southern California girl, Holland replied. What about you? Gregory turned his gaze to Misty. I've been once or twice, she replied. What? He looked incredulous. You live 20 minutes from Sun Valley and don't ski? It was on the tip of Misty's tongue to reply that skiing was expensive, and even though Ty had money now, it wasn't always the case. But she held herself back and managed a smile instead. I guess I never made it a priority. Oh, you definitely have to go more often, you'll love it. I'll get you all some season passes and we can all go together. I try to get out there every day during peak season. With priority passes, I can bypass the crowds so it doesn't take so much time. Another memory rose in Misty's mind. When they were leaving Calico Pete's, Travis had opened the door for her, then been stuck as several large groups came through at once. Instead of leaving the door to swing shut in someone's face, he'd held it patiently, letting them all go ahead, even though he'd been there first. She doubted he would ever use his connections to cut in line at a ski resort. Yeah, because he would never be in a position to have connections, and even if he were, Mr. High and Mighty's ideals would think it beneath him. She wanted to be scornful, but the thought just made her sad. Okay, talk, Holland said as soon as they were back in Ty's car. Gregory had offered to drive Misty home after dinner, but she'd gratefully pointed out she could just as easily ride with Ty and Holland and save him the trip. Logic and gas savings in the face of romance, exactly what someone looked for in a date, right? What? She crossed her arms and scrunched down on the back seat of Ty's black Mustang. There's nothing to talk about. For it being a nothing, you were pretty upset in the bathroom, Holland said stubbornly. Ty shot Misty a glance in the rearview mirror, sympathy in his brown eyes. She's going to get it out of you eventually, he said. Can we help? Misty took a shaky breath, and the whole story came tumbling out. The Clydesdales at the party, dancing at Calico Pete's, and frisbee golf. She skipped over most of the kissing, but Ty and Holland could guess what she wasn't saying, and finished up with the fight in the foundation headquarters. Man, I tipped that guy $50, Ty said, shaking his head. And he looked at me like I was trying to hand him a live tarantula. He's got issues, Misty said, sliding a little further into the seat. As painful as talking about it had been, she had to admit that she felt a little better. Like she was seeing things with a new perspective. They'd been on 2 dates, and she'd practically been planning the wedding, acting just like she had with Chet, impulsive and irrational. Maybe it was good it had all blown up when it did. Chapter 9. Misty knocked on the dark stained oak door and waited for the hollered invitation. Come in. She pushed the door open and stepped into Ty's office. Before the renovations, it was the biggest bedroom in the house, but that wasn't saying much. Space was still tight and Ty's oak desk, straight from the nearest Costco, took up most of the room. The cardboard banker boxes he used as a filing cabinet were the bane of Holland's existence. Like his office, Ty was the opposite of flashy. He was handsome in a way that made Holland light up whenever he entered the room, and he might be the luckiest billionaire in the history of Idaho, but deep down he was still the same guy who'd grown up shearing sheep on the farm. In the 2 years since he'd won the lottery, he'd turned the Epperson Foundation from a dream into a reality with real goals and real results. They were working to return control of local lands from federal to state agencies, and while the reams of government red tape were overwhelming, they were slowly making progress. Misty stood still for a minute, realizing how much he'd done and how proud she was of him. So what's up, Misty? Ty nodded toward the chair on the other side of his desk. I'm wondering about the Sun Valley Clydesdales, she said, taking a seat. Ty frowned. Are you asking on behalf of the Clydesdales or for their driver? Forget about Travis, I already have, Misty said, hoping her tone sounded convincing. In truth, she still thought about Travis way too much. Still ached for his kisses way too much. Well, as far as the horses go, I didn't expect them to shut down the whole pasture, Ty said, bringing her thoughts back to the conversation. I've asked the attorneys to look into it and they think we can get the scope of the study reduced so the process will go faster. But this is the government, Misty pointed out. It could still be years, and in the meantime, what about the horses? Ty twirled his pen in his long fingers. I'll talk to the lawyers again. Maybe there's something more they can do to speed it up. She took small encouragement from the thought. Anything else? Ty asked. Yes. She took a deep breath. What would you think about expanding the mission of the foundation? Such as? I haven't worked out any details, but what if we took a more direct role in helping people so we weren't always waiting for lawyers or the government to figure things out? Ty looked thoughtful. Like giving out grants? And scholarships, Misty said. The more she thought about it, the more the idea excited her. What kind of qualifications would you ask for? Ty asked. Misty spread her hands. I don't know. Like I said, I haven't worked out any details. He gave her a grin. Well, get started and let me know what you come up with. Really? Sweet. That was easier than she'd expected. I'll look into similar programs and get back to you. She left his office with a new spring in her step, feeling better than she had in days. Misty was surprised on the morning of July 4th when Gregory arrived in the Lembo. I thought we were going to the parade, she said, eyeing the pumpkin-colored sports car parked in her driveway. There's no back seat for Wyatt in your car. Realization flashed through Gregory's eyes, followed quickly by panic, and Misty understood. He hadn't thought Wyatt would come with them. He's my kid, she said, stressing the words. And I've been looking forward to showing him the parade all week. They both glanced to where Wyatt sat playing on the grass, decked out in denim shorts and a t-shirt printed with the American flag. Maybe your parents can bring him? Or Ty and Holland. Gregory suggested. Why don't we just take my car? Gregory threw a quick look toward her red Honda in the carport. My car is good advertising for the ski resort, he said, a small note of apology in his voice. Yeah, right. There were no Firebird stickers or logos on the Lambo. He wanted to drive his hot car and be seen driving his hot car. I'll call my mom, she grumbled, spinning from the doorway to go back inside. An hour later, they found a spot along the parade route, and Gregory backed in beside her parents' pickup truck. The bed of the truck was already filled with camp chairs, an air mattress, and coolers, and Misty's dad was busy hanging a huge American flag from the back of the cab. You gonna sit with us? Ashley asked as Misty held out her arms for Wyatt. This was how they usually watched the parade. Everyone piled into the bed of the truck, sipping on sodas, cheering, and waving at the parade participants and using paper bags to hold the candy and trinkets the people on the floats threw to the crowd. Misty didn't even like the cheap candy, it was the tradition of it more than enjoying the actual candy. She glanced over her shoulder to see Gregory spreading a blanket in front of the Lambo. I'll sit with Gregory for a while. Ashley's face fell in disappointment. Okay. But want me to keep Wyatt? No. He can sit with us. Misty balanced her son on her hip and moved toward Gregory. Ty and Holland arrived a few minutes later, pulling Ty's pickup into position next to their dad's. They were outfitted almost the same way, and Misty felt a little silly crouching on a blanket in the weeds and gravel while the rest of her family lounged in the trucks. There's room to sit with them, she pointed out more than once. But Gregory shook his head every time. This is okay, isn't it? I kind of want to just be with you. Hey, you two, want an air mattress? Misty's father called. He held up a twin-sized mattress, already inflated. Yes, please. Misty said quickly before Gregory could overrule her. Her dad tossed them the mattress, and they got it situated in front of the Lambo's front bumper and covered with the blanket. Wyatt gave the setup a few experimental bounces and tipped too far. With a small cry, he reached out to grasp the bumper of the Lamborghini to steady himself. Oh, can he not do that? Gregory asked, giving Misty a sheepish look. Sorry, I just don't want it scratched. Sure. Misty bit back her exasperation as she pulled Wyatt away from the car and onto her lap. Gregory had never been around kids before, he'd get used to it. The parade started, and she made an effort to get into it, for Wyatt's sake, if nothing else. She pointed out the horses, the dancers, and bright flags, covered his ears when the fire truck came by blasting its horn, and fed him pieces of saltwater taffy. Horsey. Wyatt squealed, pointing. Misty looked up from unwrapping a taffy, and her heart clenched at the sight of the brown and white Clydesdales hitched to the shiny black wagon with the gold logo. The bed of the wagon was full of people she didn't know, waving and throwing plastic beads, but her eyes shot immediately to the driver. Travis held the reins, but he wasn't watching the team. His head turned to watch her as the wagon rolled past. His expression was unreadable, but she knew how it looked, what he must be thinking seeing her sitting with Gregory in front of the fancy car. Her cheeks burned, and she dropped her gaze back to the candy, only to find she'd squeezed it into a sticky lump. You okay? Gregory leaned toward her. Misty nodded. Yup, fine. I'm going to get some wet wipes to clean this up. Can you take him? She held Wyatt out to Gregory, who took him gingerly and held him with arms outstretched, as if Wyatt were a baby-sized personification of the Ebola virus. Misty clenched her teeth as she stood up and brushed off the back of her jeans, trying to drive away the memory of how Travis had handled him so easily. She turned toward her parents' truck to fetch the diaper bag and locked eyes with Travis, who had craned his head as far as he could to keep her in his sight. With a quick jerk, he turned around to face forward, his back stiffening against the seat of the wagon. The rest of the parade route went by in a blur, and Travis kept his attention focused on the hindquarters of the Clydesdales. He'd been hoping to see Misty at the parade, but not like that. Not cuddled up with her new boyfriend in front of a car that cost more than he'd make in 5 years. She was obviously moving onward and upward, and no matter what she said, his first impression had been right. He shook his head in disgust, partly at her, but mostly at himself for daring to think this one would be different. Chapter 10. Misty clutched the door handle as Gregory steered the Lembo around the tight corners of Sawtooth Canyon. They were going to the Firebird Lodge, where he had promised a special surprise. If they made it alive. The car hugged the road and handled the corners with ease, but the sudden drop-off out Misty's window made her nervous all the same. There had been plenty of accidents on this road, and rumors persisted that some of the cars still sat at the bottom of the deep ravine, minus any passengers of course. It had been too expensive to tow them out, so they sat slowly rusting in mute testimony to the dangers of this road. "Are you enjoying your summer?" Gregory asked, breaking what had been a rather long silence. Why had she agreed to come with him? They hardly had anything to talk about, and there certainly didn't seem to be any chemistry between them. They hadn't even kissed yet. She would have thought he'd give up on her by now, but he hadn't. Was he that desperate for company? Misty cleared her throat, determined to make an effort. "It's been okay. Kind of the usual, though, with work and family." She chuckled. "Summer breaks in school gave me a very unrealistic idea of what the rest of my life would be like." The corner of Gregory's mouth twitched in a smile. Travis would have laughed and then come up with a story of his own about smashed childhood dreams. Like maybe how he'd always expected red-hot lava to be a bigger problem in everyday life than it had turned out to be. Her throat tightened. She could practically hear the words in his voice. A few miles later, Gregory pulled through the huge stone and timber gates of the Firebird Resort. It was situated in a narrow valley filled with condos. Ski runs carved their way through the thick pines of the surrounding hills. They were grassy now, but in the winter, they'd be covered in snow, and skiers. "The Bunny Hill is over there." Gregory pointed out her window. "When we come skiing this winter, that's where you'll start, but I have an excellent instructor. He'll have you zooming down the harder slopes in no time." Misty wasn't sure what she resented more. That he assumed she wanted to become an expert skier, that he assumed they'd still be going out come winter, or if they were, that he wasn't interested in teaching her how to ski himself. She thought of how Travis had shown her how to fling the frisbees when they'd been golfing, hampered only slightly by the weight of Wyatt on his back. He'd taken a personal interest in both of them. Gregory seemed to be only going through the motions. Okay, that wasn't fair. She couldn't hold every guy from now on to the Travis standard. And even if she did, wouldn't that mean she should expect him to have a giant chip on his shoulder and get mad over nothing? The Firebird Lodge was a huge building of pale stone, accented with thick, heavy timbers and a peaked roof designed to shed winter's accumulating snowpack. It was definitely the focal point of the valley, overshadowing the condos. Gregory pulled up at the entrance and the doorman hurried forward to open Misty's door. "Welcome, Mr. Brooks," he said, then gave Misty a polite nod. "Welcome, miss." "Thanks." Misty swiveled in her seat so she could put both feet on the ground at the same time and avoid any unfortunate flashing. She had forgotten the car's low seats when choosing her outfit, and her skirt, hitting a few inches above the knee, could have used a few more inches. Gregory handed the keys to the Lamborghini to a waiting valet and reached for Misty's hand. "Could you please see that our bags are delivered to the King's suite?" he asked the doorman. "Suite?" Misty's heart thumped. Gregory had told her to pack a swimming suit, but hadn't said anything about a hotel suite. "I've arranged for a private dinner in the suite," he said with a grin. "But first I wanted to show you the art gallery. We just got some new pieces in last week." Pulling her hand, he led her through the 3-story lobby, which was dominated by a huge stone fireplace. Wait, what's this about a suite? Misty demanded, stopping so suddenly that he stumbled and let go of her hand. Gregory turned to face her, his eyes wide with concern. Oh, no. Nothing like that. It's the best suite in the lodge, and it has its own hot tub on the balcony with a killer view. I never thought. He held up both hands, palms out. I promise it's only dinner and then the hot tub if you want. The tension in her shoulders eased a bit and she nodded. Thanks for clearing that up. They continued to the gallery, but her mind churned. Was he being sincere? Why would you take a woman to a hotel room unless you wanted that? And even if she'd refused now, was he still hoping on some level once they got there and had dinner and relaxed in the hot tub that she'd get in the mood? Not gonna happen. The art gallery had white walls, concrete floors, and an exposed ceiling with black painted ductwork. The latest in the modern look, Misty concluded, though she did think the gallery didn't match the rest of the building. Paintings hung in spotlights along the walls and sculptures were placed throughout the room, seemingly at random, though Misty suspected someone had spent hours deliberating just the right placement of every article. She'd been expecting breathtaking vistas and cowboy sculptures, the kind of art one usually saw in Sun Valley. But this was different. Modern. A flat-screen TV on the wall played nothing but static while a voice droned through the speakers, saying something unintelligible. According to the placard, it was supposed to be a brave exploration of time and space in a digital world, but to Misty, it looked like her living room when she hit the wrong button on the remote and the streaming service went down. Gregory stopped in front of a canvas covered in splotches of color. Misty gasped when she leaned close and saw the price tag. $1,500? For finger painting? He gave her a tolerant smile. You have to take time to appreciate the themes of the piece. She stared at it for several minutes, totally mystified. I dunno. To me it still looks like globs of paint. They went through the rest of the gallery, and by the end, Misty had to admit she was unimpressed. Maybe I just don't get modern art, she said as they stared at a white vase full of clear glass rods. This placard said it represented the human condition, but Misty couldn't see how. Well, it can be an acquired taste, Gregory said at last, giving her an out. I have a Mueller in my condo, and at first I hated it, but now it's grown on me. She was about to ask what a Mueller was, but realized she didn't care. Besides, the question was lost in the flood of nerves as she realized he was leading her toward the elevators. They rode to the top floor in silence and walked together down hushed hallways to the double doors at the end. Gregory produced a key card from his wallet and held it up to the door. The green light flashed, and he pushed the door open. After you, he said with a grin. She could definitely see why it was called the King's Suite. The whole main room was given over to the living area with a kitchen bigger than the one in Misty's house. Plush leather sofas faced a stone fireplace with a large TV above the mantel. 2 sets of French doors flanked the fireplace, leading to a wide balcony with a view of the slopes. Another set of double doors stood open, leading to the bedroom and an enormous king-sized bed with a tall, wooden headboard and a pristine white comforter. I had them put your bag in the master bedroom, Gregory said, coming up behind her. Goosebumps prickled down her arms at his breath on the back of her neck. I'll use the bedroom on the other side. She hadn't noticed the other door standing open to reveal a bedroom every bit as luxurious as the master suite, just on a smaller scale. So, dinner first or hot tub? Gregory asked. How about dinner? Misty worked to keep her voice steady. I'm starving. The prime rib and baked potatoes were perfectly cooked, and the green salad was especially delicious, but Misty's stomach churned, and she couldn't help casting glances at the now closed doors leading to the master's suite. Memories of Chet washed over her, the way he used to beg, flatter, and guilt her into giving in. Gregory was much more of a gentleman, but guys were guys, right? When it came right down to it, didn't they all eventually want the same thing? "Are you okay?" Gregory asked when her silence had evidently gone on too long. "Yeah." Misty put her napkin on the table. "I think I'll go check out the view." A light breeze drifted across the balcony, sending wisps of her hair dancing around her face. From 6 floors up, she had a stunning view of the trees, the naked ski slopes, and the condos nestled into the hills. It was dusk, and lights shone in a few of the windows, but most were dark. That figured. Many were probably vacation homes and only lived in when the snow was high and the skiing was good. "Misty?" Gregory came to stand slightly behind her, and she felt his breath mix with the breeze on her neck. "Did I make you uncomfortable in there?" She clenched her fingers around the rail, determined to keep her perspective and not let bad memories of Chet overwhelm her. "No, I'm good." "Okay. I was afraid I'd done something wrong." "It's fine," she said, still concentrating on the view. She jumped a bit when his hands skimmed softly up her arms to her shoulders, where he started making slow circles on her bare skin with his palms. She wished she'd worn a dress with sleeves. "I really like you," he said low in her ear. "I think we could be good together." Misty willed herself to relax. Of course it would be awkward, this part was always awkward at first, right? But it hadn't been awkward with Travis. It had been magic. Need and desire and affection and fun, all merged into one perfect moment. It had been the easiest thing in the world to lean in and press her lips to his. Gregory's grip on her shoulders tightened and she let him turn her so she faced him, watched as he ducked his head. She closed her eyes a split second before his lips fastened over hers while her brain whirled. Gregory was a good guy, not like Chet. He seemed to genuinely care about her and she liked him. Maybe not in the same way she'd like Travis, but that was setting the bar a little too high, right? How bad would it be if something came of this? She wrapped her arms around his waist and didn't resist when he instantly became more demanding, deepening the kiss. He tasted like the dressing on their Italian salads. Well, she probably did too. One of Gregory's hands skimmed down her back, coming to rest on the curve of her hip, while the other went to the back of her head. His arms tightened, pulling her flush against him as his breathing became faster. His mouth moved over hers quickly, carelessly. She knew he wanted her to respond in kind, but her hands stayed locked around his waist, the fingers of one hand clutching the wrist of the other. With a sinking heart, she realized that she felt nothing but a slight annoyance that his fingers were messing up her hair. She stepped back, disentangling herself from his arms. "What's the matter?" Gregory raised his head, the passion fading from his eyes. The rays of the sunset bounced off his face, shimmering on his blonde hair. "I don't, it's just," Misty curled her toes in her sandals. Her own heart was beating wildly, but from confusion, not passion. Gregory cast a glance back through the French doors, toward the bedroom. "I didn't expect things to go any farther, if that's what you're worried about." "I know." And she did know. That wasn't the problem. Kissing Gregory felt about as passionate as picking out oranges at the grocery store. There was none of the rush she'd felt simply by being near Travis, no deep urge to be closer to him, to snuggle into the crook of his arm and breathe in the scent of him. She couldn't pretend anymore. Tears sprang to her eyes. Could you please take me home? He gave her a long look, then nodded. I get it. You're not into me, are you? I'm sorry, she whispered. Gregory's jaw clenched under his pale whiskers. It's okay. I mean, I'm disappointed, but thanks for being honest. They stood in silence for a minute. Then he jerked his head toward the master bedroom. If you want to get your stuff, I'll drive you home. Chapter 1. Travis grunted as he pushed the wheelbarrow of sawdust into the stable. He'd already cleaned out the old sawdust, now he had to spread the new, about 50 wheelbarrows full, into the stalls. And this was only barrow number, was it 11? He'd lost count. He took a minute to straighten and work the kink from his back, but hesitated when he saw Duke, standing silently next to Sherlock's door in the dim light. Duke? You okay? Travis made his way toward his boss. Duke raised his head and Travis took a step back. For the first time ever, there were tears in those pale eyes. What's the matter? Travis demanded. Oh, nothing. Just being a sentimental old fool. Duke pulled a hanky from his back pocket and blew his nose. We've been through hard times before, and we'll have hard times again, but this one stings more than some of the others. He reached through the bars of the stall to stroke Sherlock's soft white nose. A dreadful realization spread over Travis. You've sold the horses? Not all of them, but some, Duke admitted, and his eyes glistened with fresh tears. The air whooshed out of Travis's lungs, just like it had the time when he was 7 and his younger brother had jumped from the top bunk, using Travis as a landing pad. Because of the feed, he demanded hollowly, though he already knew. Duke lifted his shoulders. Can't afford them. It's as simple as that. But we're going to get the grazing land back, this is only temporary. It just has to go through a committee evaluation.
Yeah.
But we've held out as long as we can. The horses need to eat every day, they can't wait for any committee. Duke cast an eye to the corner of the stable, where a stack of bagged feed was dwindling. That's all I can afford right there. Travis looked at the pile. It had seemed huge last week when he and Doug were unloading it bag by bag. But now it was tiny, completely insufficient for the Clydesdales. A hollow ache gnawed at his stomach. What about me and Doug, he asked. You could let one of us go. The idea he might have just put himself out of a job brought a wave of panic, but he had to be realistic. If Duke couldn't afford to feed the horses, how could he afford his employees? Duke met Travis's eyes. I thought of that, he said gruffly. But it's hard to find work nowadays. We don't need all the horses to run the operation, so if I have to pick, I'll hold on to the people as long as I can. He said it with obvious sincerity, and Travis felt a swelling of pride for this simple, honest man whom he loved like a father. As much as he cared about his animals, Duke's first priority would always be his men. Which ones are you selling? He asked. Duke blew out a breath. I've talked to a couple of buyers back east. Sherlock's getting up there in years, so they didn't want him, but Candy and Jemima are still good breeders. I've also been talking to them about Harrison and Lilybell. Almost half the herd. Travis gritted his teeth. There was a good chance they would go to responsible, careful breeders who loved horses and who would treat them with care. But they could just as easily go to someone without the right equipment or the right understanding of how to handle Clydesdales. He told Misty draft horses were pretty much like their smaller cousins, and that was true, except when it came to breeding. Misty. If it hadn't been for her and her stupid brother, they wouldn't be in this mess. But his flare of fresh anger was immediately snuffed out by the anguish on Duke's face as he rubbed a gnarled hand over Sherlock's nose. In any case, guess it'll be roomier around here soon, huh, buddy, he said softly. Duke's noble convictions or not, Travis wasn't going to let the horses go without a fight. Did you already make the deal with any of the stables back east? Travis asked. Duke shook his head. I haven't made any final decisions. He hadn't told Duke about Misty's offer to buy their feed. Because he was a stubborn idiot. And because he hadn't realized the situation was quite so close to the wire. Give me a couple of hours, okay, he pleaded. Maybe I can fix it. I don't see how. We've already been to bat over it. Luck's just not on our side this time. You're just like my dad, always the pessimist. Travis smiled. Just give me today before you accept any offers, okay? Duke nodded. Travis parked in front of the small butterscotch-colored house on Main Street, his stomach already churning. It had been a month since he'd been here, since he'd seen Misty, since their fight. How many times had he thought about her? Considered texting her? Wishing he could apologize? Hundreds. But he hadn't, and now he was here, literally hat in hand, to beg for money. She'd never believe his apology now. The receptionist's friendly smile soured when she obviously recognized him. Great. Getting off to a fantastic start. Can I help you? She said coolly. Is Misty here, please? She's not. Can I take a message? Travis's heart sunk. As humiliating as this was, he'd been looking forward to seeing her. Will she be in today? The receptionist shook her head. I could schedule an appointment for you on Monday, she might have an opening. Her tone left no doubt that she preferred he leave and never come back. Can I help with something? A tall, dark-haired man came down the hall and Travis did a double take. It was the guy who'd tipped him a 50 on the hayride. I'm Misty's brother, Ty, the man said. Is there something I can help you with? I'm Travis Harper. I work at Sun Valley Clydesdales. Ty's face immediately darkened, leaving no doubt in Travis's mind that he knew at least part of the story. Why don't you step into my office? Ty said, his voice not quite as friendly as before. After they'd settled into the leather chairs, Ty steepled his fingers together under his chin and surveyed Travis thoughtfully. What can I do for you? I'm here on behalf of the horses, Travis said firmly, anxious to set the understanding early that this was not about Misty. Ty nodded. The grazing rights? Yeah. My boss told me today he's going to have to sell off half the herd unless they can get back into the pasture. Because otherwise it's too expensive to feed them? Ty guessed. I can understand that. Travis nodded shortly. I sure am sorry about that. Ty sighed heavily. I didn't think they'd want such an extensive study when we submitted the petition. I can speak with our lawyers, but I'm sure you know the wheels of government turn very slowly. So I can't give you a date on when the pasture will be open again. Travis's heart fell and his throat tightened at the thought of saying
Goodbye.
to the horses. Misty had offered financial help, but evidently she hadn't told Ty about it. The thought of begging for money from this man turned his stomach. He was about to get up and leave, but the memory of the tears in Duke's eyes made him pause. My boss has sunk his whole life into Sun Valley Clydesdales. I can't stand by and watch him lose it all. The next words were harder to get out, but he clenched his fists atop his thighs and forced himself to continue. When I talked to Misty, she mentioned you. The foundation might be able to help him with the feed. Ty's face was carefully neutral. If this is Duke's livelihood, why didn't he come himself? Why send you? Travis's gut twisted as everything clicked into place. And so what if he made a fool of himself? The thought of disappointing Duke was more than he could bear. Because I'm the jerk who is about to cost him everything. Ty's face remained impassive, so Travis plunged ahead. I didn't tell him about Misty's offer because we'd had a fight and she made me mad. I have a bad history with wealthy people, and when I found out she was your sister. He stopped, not wanting to make excuses. Look, I'm not proud of what I said to Misty. She accused me of not playing with a full deck, and she's probably right. In spite of himself, he felt a grin spring to his lips at the memory of the feisty flash of her eyes. I acted like an idiot and I said some things I shouldn't have, things I didn't mean. She trusted you. Ty said, and for the first time, a hint of accusation entered his voice. I know, Travis admitted. And I know I hurt her. I'd like to apologize. So why don't you? Ty challenged. You have her number, why don't you call her? I'd rather do it in person. I think I owe her that much, Travis said, refusing to break eye contact. It must have been the right answer, because a bit of warmth entered Ty's brown eyes and he reached for a notepad on his desk. My sister has accused me of not playing with a full deck before too, he admitted as he started writing on the paper. She's got a few more zingers she'll probably want to use on you, so be warned. I think I can handle it. Travis smiled. If I come back on Monday, will she see me? Ty tore the sheet from the notepad and slid it across his desk. Travis glanced down and saw an address. She's home today. Why don't you go tell her now? Ty suggested in a soft voice. Go and profess his love today. When he'd just come from the stables, and even though he'd changed his shirt to come into town, he definitely needed a shave, and probably a haircut and a shower would be a pretty good idea at the moment as well. But he couldn't wait. He had to see her. Travis extended his hand across the desk. Thanks, man. I appreciate it. They shook and Travis folded the paper with Misty's address and put it in his pocket. I'll be good to her, I promise. That's what I wanted to hear. Ty grinned. Now why don't you give me Duke's number? I'll call him about the feed while you're getting your rear end handed to you by my sister. Looking forward to it, Travis said, and meant it. Chapter 12. Travis pulled up to Misty's house. Ty had told him it was the house they'd grown up in, and Misty had taken it over when their parents moved to the larger, more modern home he could see at the end of the dirt road. Well, he liked this one better. It was a modest two-story with a wide front porch and a stone chimney. The front door was painted bright blue, and it sat on a wide lawn in front of a cluster of barns and other outbuildings. He sat in the truck for a few minutes, trying to decide what he'd say. What could he say but the truth? He'd made assumptions, he'd let his pride get in the way of his common sense. He'd let hurt feelings from the past take over everything else. Finally, he climbed the steps and knocked on the front door, his heart in his throat. There was no answer. He waited a few minutes and knocked again, but there was still no answer. Disappointment thundered through him as he turned away. He was almost to his truck when loud squawking came from the back of the house. He hurried around to where a good-sized chicken coop stood off the expanse of back lawn. The door was open, and chickens were wandering in and out, pecking at the grass. The squawk came again, and he went to the door and stuck his head inside the coop. Misty stood in front of a row of wooden boxes filled with straw. Her hair was caught in a messy ponytail at the nape of her neck, and she wore a floral print tank top, a pair of denim shorts, and rubber chore boots. Wyatt sat balanced on one hip, and there was a bucket at her feet. Misty. He took a step inside, his shadow darkening the doorway. She looked up and stiffened. Go away, Travis. He'd expected anger, not her tone of indifference, which was almost worse. No. We need to talk. I don't have anything to say to you. She stooped to set an egg in the bucket. Well, maybe I have some things to say to you. Misty kept her eyes focused on the nesting boxes. Let me guess, you want to tell me how idiotic you were to make a stupid assumption based on some dumb idea without finding out the details first. In spite of himself, he smiled. You called me an idiot, stupid, and dumb in one sentence. Ty said you'd need a little while to get it out of your system. Was that it? Ty? Her head shot up. You talked to my brother? Just now. He gave me your address. Misty looked at him for a minute, then turned away. At least get out of my light, I can't see. This was good. At least she wasn't kicking him out. Or throwing eggs at him. He took a few steps into the coop, and the hen sent up a disgruntled squawk at the invasion. Misty didn't look at him, just continued gathering eggs with a crease between her eyebrows and a determined set to her shoulders. Hey, Wyatt, how's it going, buddy? Travis asked, and the baby looked over and sent him a smile. Want me to take him? He asked Misty as she bent awkwardly to set another egg in the bucket. No. He's fine, Misty said shortly. I swear, you are the most stubborn woman I've ever met, Travis said in exasperation. Me? You're the one who won't go away, after multiple invitations, I might add. He felt kind of proud of that. You wanted to talk, so talk, she finally said. He glanced around the coop, sunlight slanting in through the cracks in the ceiling, dust motes dancing. Your brother is talking to Duke today. He's going to arrange for some money to cover the cost of feed until the pasture can be reopened. Gee, what a great idea. I wonder why no one thought of it before, Misty snapped. Travis growled in frustration. I came here to apologize, you know. Let me know when you're done thinking up smart retorts and I'll continue. She paused, and he saw the color rise to her face. I'm glad they're going to take care of the horses, she finally said. Me too. Especially since it's my fault he almost lost them. I should have listened to you that day and accepted your help. I'm sorry. Misty set another egg into the bucket. Is that all? No. I also need to apologize for what I said to you. I made some snap judgments, and I was wrong. You think?
Yeah,
I've had some bad experiences with rich people, he said defensively. That still doesn't mean you should judge everyone by the actions of a few, she said. Okay, you're right, and I'm sorry. But you lied to me too, remember? Why didn't you tell me who you were the night of the party? What choice did I have? You practically introduced yourself by saying, "Hi, I'm Travis and I hate rich people." Of course I'm not going to say anything and have you jump down my throat. She brushed a strand of hair away from her eyes. Besides, I'm not a rich person. But your brother is. And he's practically the nicest guy on earth, Misty shot back. She glanced into the rest of the nesting boxes. I'm done here. He moved forward a bit warily to take the bucket, but she let him, leading the way out of the coop and into the sunshine. So what about you? Are you going to marry your rich boyfriend? Travis pressed as he followed her across the grass toward the house. None of your business, she said over her shoulder. Besides, he was never my boyfriend. Hope surged in his chest, and for the first time, he let himself imagine how it could be, the three of them together, holding her in his arms for the rest of their lives. My fiancé dumped me for a rich guy, he called, and ahead of him, Misty halted. We were 4 months from the wedding, and Ashlyn met someone else. I would have given her anything, but she threw it away for a guy with a Maserati and a condo in Cancun. Misty had reached the shade of a giant willow in the middle of the lawn. She paused, then turned around. I'm sorry, she said in a quiet voice. It must have been very difficult.
yeah,
It was, he said simply, edging closer. The guy knew she was engaged, but he wanted her. So he took her, just like that. He paused and shook his head. I know it wasn't entirely his doing, she had a choice. And she chose the guy with the money. You loved her a lot, then, Misty said. It was a statement, not a question. The sun dappled through the willow tree, gleaming on the strawberry blonde of her hair and highlighting the freckles dotting her nose, like nutmeg sprinkled on cream. For so long the memory of Ashlyn and the bitterness of what happened had festered in his gut, poisoning everything. But here, under the dancing willow branches with Misty, it felt like all that was dissolving. Like he could finally take a deep breath again after years of being in a straitjacket. Travis smiled, he loved her freckles. I thought I did, he replied as he took a step toward her. But after a while, I realized I didn't even know her. Someone who would do that, well, that's not the kind of person I want to end up with anyway. Her eyes softened and she jiggled Wyatt on her hip. What kind of a person do you want to end up with? He glanced at her feet, then back to her eyes. Someone with chicken manure on her boots. Someone who loves animals. Who is a great dancer and who has fire and spirit. Someone who is a great mom who isn't afraid to give everything her all. Misty wet her lips, a smile hovering at the corner of her mouth. His heart was racing as if it would burst through his chest at any minute. Noted, Misty finally said. But you forgot about my mad frisbee golf skills. Travis moved close enough to snake an arm around her waist. Of course. How could I forget frisbee golf, he whispered softly. Misty raised her head so their faces were inches apart, her breath mingling with the breeze on his cheeks, tickling his lips. Don't let it happen again. She smiled. I love you, he whispered. I love you too, she said. Then Misty went up on her tiptoes, and his arms went around her and around Wyatt as their lips came together. Time and space seemed to melt into this one moment where they were the only people in the universe. Her body fit against his as perfectly as puzzle pieces, and deep inside, he felt the click of something coming together: Travis, Misty, and Wyatt. Together. Chapter 13. Jemima shook her massive head, sending the bells on her harness jingling through the night. Wyatt giggled. Horsey. Misty took his fingers and helped him to gently stroke Jemima's neck. Isn't she pretty? Jemima twisted her head to see who was petting her and gave a small grunt that sounded like approval. Ho-see, Wyatt parroted. His blue eyes matched his knit cap, and Misty's heart surged with love. This boy. Her boy was her world. Well, maybe not her whole world anymore. Travis came around Jemima's head, his fingers moving over the leather straps as he checked the harness. He flashed a quick grin at Wyatt. He likes the horses? Yup. Misty nodded. I knew he would. Her heart felt lighter than it ever had. She'd wanted to be part of his world, now their worlds were combining. Good boy. Travis nodded in approval. His eyes danced as he looked at her. You ready? He held Wyatt while she climbed into the wagon, then passed him up to her waiting arms. The wagon dipped as Travis climbed in and took the reins. So Jemima and Sherlock, right? Misty searched her memory, trying to name the other horse. Yup. Travis shook the reins, and the big horses moved out, bells jingling. Behind them, the empty wagon creaked. This was no hayride for a bunch of wealthy patrons, this was just for the three of them. The three of them. Her heart swelled and she leaned in, resting her cheek against the swell of muscle on Travis's arm. He transferred the reins to one hand so he could put his arm around her and draw her close. Do you see the stars, Wyatt? Misty pointed at the darkening sky, where a few stars were beginning to shine against the velvety sky. Stars, the little boy said in a hushed voice. He pointed at the team. Ho-see. You got it. Misty beamed. They rode in silence for a few minutes, the only noises the bells, mixed with the heavy footfalls of the horses on the dirt road and the rattling of the wagon behind them. Did you get registered? Misty asked. Yep, Travis replied. Nervous? He hesitated, then nodded. Maybe a little. But it'll be worth it. Ty had liked her proposal, so Misty had gladly given her marketing duties to Jamie and started a scholarship program through the Epperson Foundation. The goal was to support local ranchers and farmers, and one of the foundation's first awards went to Travis, so he could go back to school. He'd finish his 4-year degree from USU through the College of Southern Idaho, then go on to earn his doctorate of veterinary medicine, focusing primarily on large animals. It would be a long process, but in the end, the area would have a much-needed vet, and Travis would have his dream. Misty was finding much more fulfillment administering the scholarship program than she had with marketing. Wyatt leaned forward to reach for the reins, his little fingers grasping for the thick leather straps. You wanna drive, little man? Travis asked. He held out his arms, and Wyatt went to him willingly. Travis settled the baby on one thigh and handed him the ends of the reins while keeping a grip on them a few inches up the lines. Wyatt crowed with delight and shook the reins. The horses pricked up their ears, but Travis's firm grip evidently reassured them, because they kept the same leisurely pace. Misty took a deep breath, the new chill in the air indicating autumn was on the way. This was a great idea. She beamed at Travis. Well, you didn't get a ride before, so I figured I owed you one, he said. Misty wrinkled her nose. A hayride with a bunch of rich snobs? No way. The only good thing about that was the hot driver. Travis's arm around her shoulders tightened, pulling her closer. The smell of horses, hay, and his musky cologne mixed together to send her senses into overdrive. She lifted her face as he lowered his head to touch his lips to hers. Her butterflies took flight, tingling from head to toe until she wasn't sure if she was still sitting on the wagon or twirling through the air. The horses continued on, oblivious to the fireworks happening in the driver's seat. Wyatt laughed and shook the reins, and Misty's lips tightened under Travis's in a smile. What? He pulled back. Nothing. She shrugged. Just happy. He grinned and pressed his lips to her temple. That's my girl. They continued on into the deepening twilight, into forever. Hello, bookworms. Thank you for listening to Horses, Hayrides, and Husbands. I hope you enjoyed Misty and Travis's story. Be sure to check out its companion book about Misty's billionaire brother, Ty, and how he found love in the lucky billionaire. Ty has never considered himself lucky in life or in love until now. When Ty Epperson wins a fortune in the Idaho lottery, he's determined to put his sudden wealth to good use, even if it means hiring Holland, a Los Angeles image consultant who has never met a credit card she doesn't like. Ty is willing to put up with Holland's bossiness if it means she'll help him launch his pet project, the Epperson Foundation. Holland Morrissey isn't quite sure how Ty convinced her to put her life on hold and relocate to Hayrides, Idaho to help with his foundation. Maybe it's because the guy doesn't have a clue about style and needs all the help he can get. Or maybe it's his dedication to his cause. Or maybe it's something else, like the goosebumps that seem to break out whenever their eyes meet. As the weeks go by and she and Ty grow closer, Holland has to continually remind herself she has a life, and a boyfriend, in LA. But not all their plans for the foundation are popular and someone is determined to stop them, putting everyone and everything at risk.